Please. Thank you. I was like, oh. Hello to all of you runners around South Africa and welcome to our special edition live RunEX workshop. We have got a special edition Comrades workshop planned out for you today, and we're coming to you live from the sunny shores of the Lito here on the Dolphin Coast in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, normally we get to brag and host our legendary Comrades Marathon, but as all of you know by now, that won't be going forth this year. But there's a lot of excitement happening, and we are so glad to be a part of it right here today, presenting to you on this Comrades special. So let me get right to it, introduce myself, and then hand over to the rest of the team. So like I said, my name is Leah Jean. I'm your everyday runner. I play in the range of 5 to 21 kilometers, and I love running. That's why I'm here, and you're going to get that message coming at you a few times today. So next up, I'd like to introduce you to our performance coach, Ant Clark.
Okay, how's it guys? My name's Anthony. So I'm a sports scientist and strength and conditioning coach. So I studied and did my master's degree at Stellenbosch University, and while I was there, I worked in their sports physiology lab, testing various athletes and providing them with training recommendations. I've also worked in a strength and conditioning setup for a number of different athletes in different sports, and at the moment, I'm a performance coach here at our Move Fitness Strength Gym. I'm also a very passionate runner myself. I have a lot of experience in competitive sprinting, especially sort of the 100, 200, and a little bit of experience in 400 and 800 meter distances. And just recently, I've been getting a lot into my trail running once the sprinting's calmed down. So yeah, that's about me. I'm just going to pass it on to Nick, who's our biokineticist and founder of RunEX.
Hello everyone, welcome to our workshop. I'm Nick Akampora, I'm a biokineticist. I've studied my biokinetics degree at UKZN, did my master's in sports and exercise medicine through university in the UK, and I'm a passionate runner. I think all of us here at RunEX are extremely passionate about running. The main thing is the fact that I'm more specialized in the sort of long endurance type. I'm an ultra marathon runner myself. I competed in Comrades last year. And as part of the program, I'm in charge of more of the training, the running specific training, as well as the injury side of things. So the injury rehabilitation, as well as the injury performance management. So without any further ado, I'd like us to get going with our workshop. And today's RunEX workshop is based around running longevity. Running longevity to me is one of the most crucial things about running. The reason being is I'm an avid runner. I love running. It makes me happy. And running longevity means that I'll be able to do running for the rest of my life to a certain level of enjoyment. And the key there is it's the ultimate human race, just like Comrades. Comrades is the ultimate human race based on its distance, whereas running for me, running longevity, the ability to run for a long period of time in my life, is my ultimate human race. Where I'd like to start with our presentation, and often where I like to go with in the beginning of our workshop, is a basic index about running itself. So there's a lot of terms that fly around that you may have heard, may not have heard, but certainly sometimes you're not 100% sure what they mean. You sort of just buff them off. But here, what I've sort of put up on the screen is the Garmin screenshot from last year's conference. So you can see there last year, I ran an 8:15. You can see my pace and all that, but the interesting stuff sits all the way underneath there. You might not be able to see it very accurately, but I will go through the specifics. The things that I like to talk about when it comes to running is these 4 things over here. These sort of determine how well you're going to run, and also how well and how good your performance is going to be. So cadence is extremely important, and that is what I'm going to start off with. I would be talking about pace and all those types, but I think that's pretty basic. I mean, we understand the term pace and what it means in relation to running. But cadence is often not understood, and it's one of the easiest things that any runner can sort of achieve, just through counting your steps. That is what it is. It's the amount of steps that you take in a minute. And essentially, you're wanting to have around about 170 to 175 steps per minute. That's considered a pretty good cadence, especially in endurance running. Shorter term running, obviously, You could even push it up 180, 185, just depends on you as an individual. But what it determines is it's your stride cycle. So how quickly do you cycle through your steps? And you can imagine that if you have a slow cadence, thinking about, and I'll show you some videos as we go along, but think about someone who has a very slow stride cycling. They spend a long time hitting the ground, and they spend extra time on the ground with every step. Because if they're moving too fast, if they're moving too slow, they will spend extra time on the ground with every step. With that extra time, you have extra chance of getting injured. So cadence is an extremely important marker and something that any runner can just check for themselves by counting their steps. If you count your steps in 10 seconds, looking at your watch, count your steps every 10 seconds, you sort of get an idea of how quick you're moving through those steps. And obviously that directly will relate to everything else that I've spoken about. But what more importantly going to relate to is the next point, ground contact time. So as I mentioned, having a high cadence means that you're going to spend less time on the ground with every step. Now that we call ground contact time. So the higher ground contact time, the more ground reaction force you will get. So the more time you spend on the ground, the higher the chance you'll have of inducing a load into the ground. Also, the higher the chance there will be of the ground inducing a load on you. So essentially, that's going to create an ideal scenario for an injury. So that is why you want a high step count, so high cadence, as well as a very quick ground contact time. And a lot of the stuff we're going to be introducing today is going to be teaching you how to get that ground contact time to perfection. We then also look at vertical oscillation. That is another step over here. Now, your vertical oscillation is the amount of vertical displacement you get whilst running. You often see someone running on the road where they're spending a lot of time bobbing up and down. I'm personally responsible for that. It happens to me very, very often. And it's something that can affect your performance and also obviously can affect your injury status. Performance, well, you're spending a lot of your energy driving your body weight up into the air, whereas you should be spending a lot more of that energy driving your body forwards. So you can imagine if you're spending X amount of energy driving your body upwards instead of sending it forwards, you're more likely to get tired, and also it's not economical. That is a point that Ant, our sports scientist, is going to talk about just now. But running economy relates to all these things, and running economy is essentially how much energy is your running taking out of you. And if your vertical oscillation is quite high, we're talking about 10 centimeters being about this much, of bobbing up and down with every single step, you're going to be spending a lot more time going up and down, and you're not going to be very efficient as a runner. The last point on the screen is your stride length. Now, stride length might seem quite basic. Most people know exactly what a stride length is how long your stride is between your feet. But what people think is in order to run faster or to be better runners, they need to take these huge strides. Now, let me relate it back to everything else. If you take a big stride, your cadence is going to slow down, very much so. Now remember, if your cadence slows down, your ground contact time increases. Also, what happens if you're taking big strides, your vertical oscillation is going to be a lot higher. So in essence, your stride length should be nice and compact. You should be keeping your feet as closest to the center of power that is your body as possible. The moment your feet go too far away from your body or too far behind your body, you're displacing energy in places you don't want. And I will be showing you some videos just now and give you an exact example of what I'm talking about here. But we're going to move on to running anatomy. This is my favorite part of sort of what I like to educate people about. It's an extremely important thing in relation to running longevity, because you need to understand your body. You need to understand what muscles work to perform specific movements, and also what joints are at risk of getting injured when taking into account running longevity. So I'm just going to start with the basic of human anatomy. All right, so we have bones, we have muscles, we have tendons, we have ligaments. We all know what bones are. I don't need to go into the details of it. We all also know what muscles are. They're sort of our power production units. But often mistaken, tendons and ligaments. They're often interchangeable terms, which shouldn't be the case. And you'll find essentially what it is a ligament. It joins bone to bone. You find those in joints, and they basically increase the stability of a joint. Whereas your tendon is what connects your power production, so your muscle, to your structure, which is your bone. Now, with that aside, what is your posterior chain? I often go and talk about posterior chain to my clients, my patients, my athletes. The posterior chain is where, as an athlete, you develop most of your power from. As a runner especially, to move forward, you've got to have a strong posterior chain. Now, I've put here the muscles that generally make up your posterior chain. Obviously, if you look at the body, you've got your anterior surface, you've got your posterior surface behind you. Posterior surface is where your posterior chain lies. So we'll have your calf, your hamstring, your glutes. I haven't added your erectors, but those are also extremely important. Now, those muscles are where essentially your power production comes from. Those muscles work together to produce a movement called triple extension. So you're getting extension at your ankle joint, extension at your knee joint, and extension at your hip joint. And that triple extension is what drives us in a forward motion. Now, on the other side of your running anatomy, we have your joint stability. Now, the reason why I've separated joint stability from your muscles is because your muscles, yes, they add quite a bit of stability, but most importantly, they help you perform. Whereas your joint stability, that is where your higher incidence of injury will come in if you're not very stable, because your joints have various mechanics moving through them. Now, if your muscles, your ligaments, your tendons are not joining, are not working correctly, those areas of your body, especially here, I've put lumbar-pelvic stability, so that's sort of in this general region, your knee stability, being around about here, and your ankle stability, obviously your ankle. Those various joints affect certain parts of our body. So let's start with our lumbar-pelvic stability. That's where I love to start with all my patients, and when I show you my exercises just now, you will see exactly what I mean, how commonly misunderstood your core is. That is why I like to use the term lumbar-pelvic stability. We then get onto your knee. Now, your knee is a funny joint because if you look at it structurally, it's very, very stable. It's got many ligaments, it's got a whole bunch of muscles connecting to it from either side, and it's a pretty simple joint, but often injured in runners. And why is that? Because it's sort of stuck in between your hip and your ankle. Now, our ankle, not very stable. Our feet, not very stable. Our hips, often very underutilized. That is why the knee sits over here is one of the common causes of sports injuries in runners. The ankle, I've mentioned it briefly, but essentially the ankle, the reason why it's not so stable is because it's made up of many, many different bones, all trying to produce movement. It's actually an amazing joint. It really is. And the ligaments, the tendons, the muscles all perform a certain amount of stability. And I mean, with the ankle, we also speak a bit about the foot. Foot strength is extremely important. I can't bang on about that enough, simply because our feet is what make contact with the ground. If our feet are not strong, then we don't really stand a chance. So it's extremely important to understand that the stability coming from the foot all the way up, your kinetic chain. Kinetic chain is a term that I speak about, and it's essentially how all your human structures connect to each other and to perform movement. From your ankle, to your knee, to your hip, to your lumbar pelvic stability, even up all the way through the pectoral girdle, up into your neck and shoulders. Everything functions together in order to move you forward. So now we're going to move on to the running gait cycle. Now, the reason why I'm showing you guys this is because I want you to just get an idea. I drew this, it looks pretty nice, I think. And I want you to just get an idea of the different phases of the running gait cycle. But then what I'm also going to do is overplay a video of actual runners. I'm going to play a video of Leah and Ant. And you're going to be able to tell pretty much all these phases that I'm talking about here, as well as you're going to be able to see the difference between your everyday recreational runner, Leah, and then your more advanced sprint type athlete, Ant. So there's two specific phases when it comes to running. You have your stance phase, which makes pretty logical sense. It's your stance, it's where you're standing. It's a time that you spend on the ground. And then you have your swing phase, which is the time where your body is moving in midair, not in contact with the ground. Now your stance phase is probably the more important of the two when it comes to sports injuries and management, because obviously that's when you're making contact with the ground. Now, if you make contact with the ground badly, or if your muscle strength is not good, your foot strength is not good, all those things related. If your running technique is not good, you've got a high vertical oscillation, or you're spending a long time on the ground, you have a high ground contact time. All of that will relate to an increased chance of getting injured during your stance phase. In your stance phase, you have your initial contact. That is the first example. You can see I've tried to make it clear that your initial contact should be forefoot to midfoot. Whatever most of us do, we put ourselves in 10 millimeter drop shoes that force us into landing on our heels. Now, that might work for some, but essentially heel striking is not ideal, and you'll get a pretty good idea of that when I show you the video now. Then we have our mid stance. Our mid stance is the point where the foot is directly underneath our body. In the mid stance, we should be having a slight lean forward. That is extremely important, because what is running? It's a falling forward movement. All you're doing is just moving your legs fast enough to catch you. We then have toe off. Now, once the foot has landed, moved underneath your body, got into behind where you actually toe off, this is where the triple extension is happening. Toe off is extremely important. And I know it sounds pretty straightforward, but a lot of people's toe off is not on their big toe at all. Our big toe was designed to toe off and to launch us forward. It's got the perfect design to create a launch pad to drive us forward with a lot of power. But a lot of people don't have access to that, or haven't worked their foot enough in order to get that. So what do? They spend a long time pushing off the outside of their feet. That causes a low gear toe off. It's like pulling off on an incline with your car in third gear. It's not ideal. And what happens is you're not able to engage your posterior chain correctly through your triple extension, because you're not getting your first main extension coming through your big toe. So it's extremely important when you're on the toe off, you have the toe off coming through the big toe, as well as that triple extension pushing power from the calf, hamstring, glute, driving us in a forward movement. We then get to the float. Now, the float is what separates running from walking. In walking, and even competitive walking, you have to have 1 foot at a time at any given point of your stride. Whereas in running, that's where things change. In running, you float. That is where you send your body up in the air. Now, the float, as great and gracious as it sounds, is probably another reason why we can create a lot more injuries whilst running. It's because we're sending our body up into the air. When our body lands, it then hits the ground at 2 to 3 times more our own body weight. Now, you can imagine if you have someone who looks heavy running at 100 kilos. Now, every time they're landing, imagine 300 kilos going through their joints with every step. Like I said, 175 steps in a minute. I did the maths last night. In comrades, you take about 90,000 steps. Now, imagine 90,000 steps. Every time you land, 300 kilos, doesn't make for a pretty picture. We then get onto the heel tuck. The heel tuck is an extremely important part as well, because the heel tuck is what keeps our cycle very close to our center of gravity. You have a lot of people that don't tuck their heels, so they send their foot far behind their body, and then they have to overreach as they land. But if you tuck your heel nicely underneath your bum, you're keeping everything nice and close to your body. And what that means is that being closer to your center of gravity, first of all, you're much better able to control it. And second of all, you're not wasting any energy. And then again, you're going to end up onto the initial contact. Now from here, I'm going to just switch over to my video. And we're going to start it. So what we have here is Leah, our recreational runner, 10 to 21K athlete. You might be looking at this, you might not see much because it just looks like someone running. So let me stop it for you. And I've actually stopped it at the perfect spot. So what we have here is you can clearly see Leah landing on her heel. That is a clear sign of heel strike. She's currently running in Brooks in those shoes. They have quite a big millimeter drop. That's the design of the shoe. It's causing you to land on your heel. Now, for her, if I had to go one step back, the main reason why she's landing on the heel is because she is overreaching. You can see how straight this leg is. She is reaching very far in front of her. Now, what that does is when she lands, she's going to land on her heel, and she's also going to jolt a lot of energy up into her body, which again, not very good. What you ideally will want is this foot to make contact directly underneath the knee. And you're going to see that with Ant this time. Whilst we are here, as she's heel striking on her left foot, we actually look for that heel tuck that I was talking about on the right foot. Now, I want you to take notice how far behind this foot is to the center of Leah's body, the center of gravity. It's quite far behind, guys. So what that means is that, like I said, it's not central. She's sending a lot of energy outwards. It's not very compact, and it's not going to be very good for a running economy. From here, we move on. We're going to land directly underneath. So now, after she's landed, we take a snapshot of the foot directly underneath the center line of the body. That is the stance phase, right? You can see here, it's where we would want to see a nice lean forward from the ankles. What are we seeing? Pretty straight up. So what's happening is Leah's not leaning forward enough. On this banana-shaped treadmill, it's pretty difficult to lean. So we're going to give her the benefit of the doubt of that. But essentially what we want to see here is a falling forward action. You can kind of see from her shoulders that she's rounding quite a bit. So she's not very strong in her upper back as well. The upper back is weak. The upper pectoral region is quite tight. And that's affecting her running style. Now, can you believe that? How your shoulder region and neck can affect your running style. Not very useful, right? So those are all things that you could work on. Now, if I make it go forward to the toe-off region, here we go. So she's about to toe off. From a front view, we'd be able to see exactly where she's toeing off. But what are we seeing here? If I just stop it at this point, we're looking for that triple extension. We're looking for an extension at the ankle, knee, and hip. So ideally, you'd want a straight line over here. You can see, not very straight. It sort of goes straight to here, then it's very upright. And the reason for that is the lack of the lean forward. Now, what is that going to do? It's going to completely turn off her glute. Her glute is not going to be firing. And our glute is one of the most important muscles in driving power forward. What we do also have, we're just going to look at the other side as she lands, again, on the heel. As I mentioned, not great for impact. We're going to let her play on. And what you'll notice is we're going to have Ant coming out very soon. But whilst you're watching Leah, you can clearly see the way that the foot is moving. I'm just going to pause it again. If you had to track the foot, it sort of does this movement here. It goes directly to here, to there, to there. It sort of creates a triangle. Now, if I let that play on, I'm sure you can see that triangle shape forming. It's going to change over to Ant very soon. And with Ant, you're going to see a completely different style of technique straight away. There we go. So now we have Ant. You can see how much closer he's keeping his feet to the center of gravity. Now, I'm going to pause it again. I'm going to just bring it to the point of where he's about to land. So, first of all, what are we noticing? Ant's float is way higher. He's getting much further off the ground than Leah was. So, that sort of gives you an idea that when he's pushing off the ground, he's getting a lot more power. He's sending himself a lot more powerfully forward. But the interesting thing is you can see his foot is not, his knee is not directly locked out, straight out in front of his body. And if it is, by the time he actually makes contact with the ground, where's his foot? It's underneath his knee. Landing around about here, we can't really see it because of the treadmill, but I would assume that it's about mid-foot region. And that's exactly where we want to be landing. And Ant's running shoes, the New Balance here, they also have quite a big heel drop. So you can see that just based on a different running technique, you can land in a slightly different position, regardless of what your shoes do. The other thing that I want you to notice that is as Ant is landing nicely directly underneath his knee, how much higher is the heel? It is a lot higher. It's a lot closer to the logo. You can actually notice it. It's still a little bit lagging behind his body, but what does he do? He tucks it in quite nicely. He brings it very high. It sort of comes past the opposite knee. It's staying very close to the bum. So that's a good stride recycling. And also, whilst he's in the stance here, you can see there's a much better lean.
He's clearly falling forward. If you had to think about this being a still shot, you could see Ant falling forward from here. If I had to even go a little bit further forward, you can clearly see. Now we get to the toe off, and now you can see exactly what I mean in terms of a better toe off. You can see a much straighter line than Leah's straighter line. So Ant is able to engage his glutes a hell of a lot better even here. And then toeing off, pushing, and the other foot landing again in a nice and forefoot middle stance position. So what does this tell us? Just basically looking at the two different running techniques, we can derive a whole lot of information of injury data, performance data, and this is just one view. What we would also usually do is a front view where we can actually see whether the knee's falling in, the foot's falling in, if there's a hip drop, all of those things, the arms. There's a whole bunch of things that I could stand here and talk about, but that's not the point of today's workshop. Today's workshop is about longevity. And if I had to look at those two running styles, I'd probably say that this is the one that's going to get you the better longevity. Let's go back. And now, just bouncing off that gait analysis that we've just done, these are the top 4 tips that I have for any runner, that regardless of your level, novice, professional, maybe just wanting to get into your running, these are the top 4 tips that I would say would help you to a better, more economical running technique. Now, please note, these steps, it's not like I'm going to adapt them and try them out in tomorrow's virtual comrades. It's almost impossible to try all of this out at once if you've never tried it. It's also extremely difficult to get it right. It takes a couple of years. I mean, taking myself, for example, I've been running quite a lot for about 3 years. I'm probably still about at step 3. I'm still working very hard on my cadence, but the cadence takes a lot of work. If I look at this though, number 1 is the lean. The lean is extremely important because that is everything. If we lean forward, that is what makes us run. So leaning doesn't mean leaning from the hips. I often see people running up a hill, shuffling in this position here. Not ideal, because what they've got, it's a good dance move, but what they've got is they're leaning forward at the hips. So all of their posterior chain is not activated. They're spending a lot of weight through their quadricep. Their hip flexors are extremely tight and shortened. Not an ideal position to be in from a power production, but also from an injury perspective, putting a lot of pressure on the lower back. Not good. The heel lift. I spoke about the heel lift in the running analysis, but essentially the important part of it is the tucking of the heels to your bum. And no, it's not a kicking your bum like when you were at school and doing that quadricep stretch. It's pulling the floor, tapping the bum underneath with your heel. Whip, heel, whip, heel. So it's not lagging behind and then overstriding, because that's what a lot of people do. And in doing that, they keep their feet relatively close to the ground. And what did I call that? A lazy running technique. Because you just need to pick your heels up a little bit more and you'll get a hell lot of more bang for buck for every step that you take. The landing. I briefly touched on the landing, but guys, landing on the forefoot to the midfoot is the way to go about it. If you're landing on your heel, it's not ideal. There's a lot of people that believe it doesn't really matter the way you land from a performance perspective, and I would have to agree. But in terms of an injury incidence, the load is definitely higher through a heel striker, and you're more likely to put your body in a position where running longevity becomes compromised. Cadence. Cadence, number 4, is sort of the point that ties the 1, 2, and 3 together. Because if you run with a good cadence, you'll be leaning, you'll have a good heel lift, and you'll be landing correctly. And the others also relate to cadence, because if you lean forward nicely, if you land correctly, if you pick your heels up, your cadence is going to go up. So all these points, they sort of interrelate. But it's important to understand that right now, watching, and if it's the first time that you're hearing about this, or maybe you've never tried it before, you're currently at this stage of this model. You're unconsciously incompetent. Sorry to call you incompetent, but you were unconscious about it. So now you're conscious. Now, because I told you, you're in this phase already. Conscious competence. You're aware of the things you need to do to improve your running. You're still going to be incompetent because, like I said, it's going to take years to get this thing right. But the goal is to get to a stage where
you're going to eventually be competent, right? You're eventually going to get these things right through practice. And how would you practice them? Well, I would say I'd go out for a run and just try and lean for one lamppost to the next. Just lean. Then maybe the next one, feel what the heel lift feels like. And you'll notice lifting your heels, all of a sudden, you're going to be landing in a much better position. So there, landing already done. One run, go out, just try to keep the cadence up. That's all you got to do. One thing at a time, then eventually you introduce more and more and more till it becomes quite complex. But by then, you're going to be unconsciously competent. Because by then, you're not going to have to think about, lean forward, I've got to pick my heel up, I've got to pick my cadence. You're not going to be thinking about all those things. Because what is running? Go out there, have a blast, don't think. It's your spot to just let all your thoughts go wild. Now, one thing that I often get asked, and I want to just finish this section off on it, is running with a gradient. So whether you're running downhill or uphill, what is the best technique? Well, we've just spoken about it. Your running technique shouldn't change based on your gradient. So if you're running up a hill, naturally, because of the gradient of the hill, you're already leaning forward, even just by standing upright. All it is, if you just adapt all of this, keeping the cadence up, landing correctly, picking your heels up, that's what you got to do running up a hill. And that's pretty straightforward. Most people understand that. But remember, it's not this position here. It's the hips staying nice and straight. The other thing that's extremely important, running downhill. This is where a lot of people get it wrong. This is where a lot of people get those injuries. Reason being is running downhill, it's a lot more taxing on the body because obviously those impact loads are a lot higher. You're slowing yourself down with every step. So you're going to get a lot more muscle damage and pain from it and potentially injury. So it's important that when you run down a hill, you apply all these pointers. Contrary to belief, you're going to lean down that hill. You're going to fall down that hill. Obviously, to a certain extent, if you lean too much, then you might run out of control and land up on your face. So you don't want that, but you're going to lean forward from the ankles to a certain extent, focus on picking your heels up and keeping the cadence up. What is the number one thing that happens when you run down a hill? You slow your cadence and you try and slow yourself, landing on your heels every time. What does that do? It first of all makes you waste energy because you're running forward, but you're breaking yourself with every step. So you're slowing yourself down. So your running economy goes out the window. Second of all, because you're trying to slow yourself down, you're loading your body even more. So you have way more chance of picking up injuries through landing on your heels and trying to slow yourself down. So next time you're at a gentle gradients downward hill, try and lean forward. Try and let your body run free. I know as runners, we always look at cyclists and think, I wish I could cycle down this hill as fast as they cycle down it. You can, not to the same extent, but if you lean forward, let the hill do the work. The downhill will take you. You just got to move your feet fast enough and land correctly. I'm going to let it off now to Ant Clark, our sports scientist, where he'll take you through the next phase of the workshop.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. That was a really, really great chat on the running mechanics side of things. Definitely learned a lot. So now we're going to shift our attention a little bit more to the actual training side of things. I think most of us would have heard the phrase, train smarter, not harder. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean to train smarter? And why is it a good thing? So hopefully by the end of this little chat, you guys will know what that means and you'll actually be able to take the tips that we're going to have for you and apply them to your own training. So first off, we're just going to chat a little bit on some basic training principles. Okay, so I think the first question to ask ourselves is, why does training help us? Or how does training actually make me fitter? Why do I get fitter when I go for runs, day in, day out? Now, the key word here is actually adaptation. So the whole point of training is we're actually wanting to adapt and adapt to a stimulus. That stimulus being training. So a bit of an easier way to think of this is that, say, imagine I go for like a 5K run. My body is going to interpret that 5K run as alarm bells going off all inside it. My lungs are burning, my legs are aching. Those are alarm bells. They're actually telling our body to perceive what we're doing as a threat. Now, the body's really smart. When we finish that run, the body goes, whew, that was close. That was a little bit dangerous. I don't want that to be so dangerous next time. So let me actually try and adapt to that stimulus so that the next time I put it on my body, it's not going to feel as dangerous. And that's how we get fitter. Now, there are a few principles that sort of govern how we actually adapt to our training, and we're just going to chat about 3 of them really quickly here. So they are the principles of overload, progression, and specificity. So firstly, with overload, if you look over here, we've got a really good graph. It's actually going to help us sort of demonstrate what overload means. So if you look over here, this line that goes in a nice little wavy line over there, we're going to say it's our readiness to perform. So again, using that 5K example, imagine that this line over there is my current ability to run 5 kilometers and run it at like a certain performance level, whatever target that may be. So now I go out and I do a training session. What's going to happen to me immediately after that training session? My readiness to perform is going to go down. Why? Because I've just trained hard. I've exhausted myself. I need to recover from that training. I can't just go and perform at my best. So my readiness to perform is going to dip. Hopefully then I'm going to be smart and actually try and recover. I'm going to get some good rest in. I'm going to get some good nutrition in. And as I recover, I go back to my starting point. I'm actually going to do what we call super compensation. I'm going to super compensate. My body's going to adapt to that stimulus. And I'm going to end up at a higher point than I was at the beginning of the first training session. So that's the whole principle of overload. It basically means that we need to take a stimulus, overload our body so that our readiness to perform dips and takes a big dive, and then we can recover from that dip and be stronger once again. Now you may ask, what will happen if I train too softly or too hard? So imagine I go out for that 5K run, but I actually take it as a 5K walk, but I have been doing 5K runs. It's not much of a stimulus for me. So this line over there is only going to be a small dip. It's not really going to affect my readiness to perform. Then, correspondingly, when I go up again, it's not going to be as high as this one over there. I might just get back up to my same starting point. It's not really stimulated me. It's not overloaded me to be better. Now, the opposite, if I were to go too hard, what's going to happen is this line over there, my readiness to perform, is going to decrease even more. That's because I've absolutely gone and smashed myself. Say I go out and I've never done a half marathon in my life, and I try to go run a half marathon, so I want to be faster running 5Ks. This line's going to dip all the way down there, and then it's not going to be able to get back up here. It might not even get to where I was at the start, of my training session over there. I might actually decrease, or even worse, get injured. So that's just a rough guide to overload. Next, we're going to talk about progression. So now we're not just talking about one training session. We're talking about a long period of time training. So we're going to take this very same graph and imagine that it's extending all the way outside of the screen. Okay, so do multiple training sessions, maybe even multiple weeks or months of training. Now, I've adapted to the first couple of sessions quite nicely. I'm doing well, but I actually don't change my training at all. I keep going for the same kind of run. I do the same distance, same number of times a week, and at the same difficulty level, or the exact same pace. After a while, then this stimulus over here is not actually going to be the same to me because I've adapted, I've changed, I've become better, I've become fitter. So that stimulus is no longer really going to overload me. What's going to happen is I'm going to hit this plateau. And if I keep going, I might actually even decrease again because I'm not overloading myself. I'm not getting that line continually going up. We want this graph to continue the increase over there. So what does that mean? It means that as time goes on and as I progress through my own training, I need to progress the training itself. It needs to become more difficult in order to continue overloading me. So that's just a very basic view on progression right there. And finally, definitely, last but not least, is the principle of specificity. So what does this mean? It means that our bodies are very smart. They adapt very specifically to the specific demands that we place on them. So we adapt specifically to the specific demands we place on our body. Now this can be very intuitive. Say I want to go and I want to run my first half marathon, but I've never been a runner before. If I sit on the couch all day and don't do any training, I'm not going to get any better. I'm not going to adapt to that stimulus I need to go and run that 21K. I'm just going to get better at sitting on the couch. The same thing is if I want to run that 21K and I think, let me just go into the gym and try to train in the gym. If I lift all weights all day, I'm not going to adapt to running. I'm going to adapt to lifting weights. But if I go out and I implement a properly structured training program that targets the adaptations I need to run 21Ks, gradually increasing my distance, maybe working on pace a little bit, I'm going to adapt very specifically to those stimuli, and that's what's going to get me there to my goal. Then another little subclass under specificity that we haven't already included there, but it's also very important, is individualism. So specificity doesn't just apply to the type of training we do. It also applies to the individual. Why? Because we're all different. We all have our own very specific genetic makeups, and that's actually going to affect the way in which we respond to training. Some of you may have heard of things as responders and non-responders, and that simply just means that to certain types of training, some people are going to respond really well, they're going to adapt and get fitter a lot faster. To other types of training, they might not adapt quite as quickly, or they might adapt even more. So it's these three principles over here that we're going to sort of try and remember throughout this little chat. Okay, and before we go on, we're just going to go through some very important terminology. Now, we're not going to get bogged down in the science here. There's a lot of scientific terms. We're going to look about how practically these terms sort of affect us as a runner. So first up, we have intensity, volume, and frequency. Intensity just simply means, sort of how hard we're going, the speed we're running at, or, how high our heart rate is in a training session. Volume, well, that's sort of our overall amount of running that we're doing. In running, we often just put volume down to sort of the number of kilometers we cover in a week or a month, but it's basically just how much work are you actually doing. And strength training actually also comes into that as well. A lot of people exclude that from their volume. And finally, frequency, that's just simply how many times am I training a week? How's that going to affect me getting to my goals and how I can recover? Next, we have VO2 max. So the scientific definition of VO2 max is how much oxygen my body can take in and consume per minute. But that's not so important for this chat. What we want to look at is what does VO2 max mean practically for me as a runner? And that basically means that it is the highest intensity that I can hold for about 3 to 6 minutes, which also corresponds roughly to sort of my actual potential as a runner. We often find that people with a higher VO2 max or VO2 max speed often will perform better in races than those that have a lower one. But this isn't always the case. And the thing that really sort of decides that is maybe a little bit more important than VO2 max is our lactate threshold underneath over here. Okay, so while VO2 max is our sort of potential to perform, our lactate threshold often shows us our ability to perform right now at this moment. And what is lactate threshold and why isn't that? Well, it's basically the highest sustainable exercise intensity that I can hold. So if I think of intensity as speed, my lactate threshold is the speed that if I go over that speed, I'm going to start to fatigue really quickly. The burn is suddenly going to hit me. We all know lactic acid. Past that point, what's going to happen is if I run any faster than that lactate threshold, my body's going to begin to produce lactic acid exponentially, and it's not going to be able to clear it from my muscles. So if we look at this graph over here, we've got our blood lactate, it's this line over here, and we've got our running speed. You see it holds nice and low as we go through here. Then I get to a certain running speed, let's just say it's 15 kilometers an hour, and suddenly it shoots up. If I go faster than 15 k's an hour, I'm suddenly not going to actually be able to sustain that intensity. But if I go lower than 15 k's an hour, I'm probably going to be able to go on for quite a while, an hour, hour and a half, maybe even longer, 2 hours if I've trained for it. Then finally, we get to our aerobic and anaerobic. So very simply, for the purpose of this chat, when we refer to aerobic, we're talking about intensities that fall below our lactate threshold. So that's intensities in the blue over here across to that side. Anaerobic, we're talking about our non-sustainable exercise intensities. So that's exercise intensities above the lactate threshold. So we have it here in the orange. So just try to keep these in mind as we progress through the chat, and don't worry, I will refer back to them in a little bit. So moving on, we've got our actual categories, of training sessions. So, there's all different types of training. We like to just roughly group them into 3 very broad categories. So here we've got endurance, speed, and recovery. So when we're looking at endurance sessions, we're looking at sessions that primarily fall, at or below our lactate threshold sessions. What we do with these sessions is we try to build what we call an aerobic base. So that's pretty much just our ability to go further for longer, to actually last, to endure for a long period of time. We also use it to actually help our bodies adapt to higher training loads. So it's going to get our bodies accustomed to actually, being out on the road, getting through the training, not getting injured, and helping build a base for us to endure and survive our speed sessions without getting injured as we progress throughout the training year. With our speed sessions, these are sessions that we're going to perform above the lactate threshold, and the whole point of them is in the name, speed. We're trying to develop our ability to run faster. So this means absolutely maximally, our maximal sprinting speed, but also our VO2 max speed and any speeds above our lactate threshold, as well as our lactate threshold speed itself. Didn't mention earlier, but our lactate threshold speed often really corresponds really well to a 10K or 15K sort of race pace. So if we can improve that lactate threshold speed, we're then going to improve our ability to perform during a race. So these sessions are really important for developing our actual speed work and making us run faster in our races. Finally, we've got our recovery sessions. These are also exceptionally important. These are going to flush us out. These are our easy runs that we go for 15 to 20 minutes, and they could even be a walk. The whole point is just to get the blood flowing to the muscles, get ourselves moving, feeling good for the next sessions. Also gives us a little bit of work on the heart. It's actually almost, crossing over slightly with some of the endurance sessions. And it's also just a really good opportunity to sometimes do some technique work, really light technique work. We don't tax the body too much, but we can actually improve our running technique and running economy when we do that. So next we're going to chat about training zones. So now we've given these different types of categories of training sessions, but how do we actually know that we're training in those categories? And this is where training zones can be a very useful thing. So as we mentioned earlier, we adapt very specifically to the demands we place on our bodies, and depending on how hard we train or what intensity we go at, the higher the speed we train or the lower the speed we train at, the heart rate, it's going to have very different effects on our bodies. And that's what these training zones are. They're ranges of these intensities where very specific adaptations will take place to our running, and we use them to structure our training sessions. So we just like to group it into 5 training zones. It keeps it a lot simpler. Some people can go more, especially in the high intensity zones, but 5 is going to get the job done for what we need. So we've got zone 1 being our active recovery zone, zone 2 our base endurance, zone 3 aerobic tempo, zone 4 threshold, and zone 5 anaerobic sprint. And now you can probably guess from the names, everything below our threshold zones is going to be more in our aerobic zones, our base. We're going to include them in our endurance training sessions over there. So these are the sessions where we'll typically go further, for longer. It feels a lot more comfortable when we run in these zones. And that's where we sort of build our endurance base. Threshold, we're really working on practicing sort of our racing, our efficiency, how long we can go at our race pace, and also trying to improve that race pace. And the anaerobic sprint, we're dipping into that red zone. This is where we're pushing really hard. If you look over here, we've got 2 categories. We've got perceived effort, so that's a 1 to 10 difficulty level, 1 being easy, 10 being almost impossible, and heart rate intensity going from low to high. The red zone over there, this is where we're flatlining, our heart rate's at max, we're really pushing. That's where we're going to get our speed work done in. Okay, we're going to chat a little bit more in a bit about how we actually use these zones and implement them into sessions, and especially how we implement them into the training year. But first, we're going to chat about our actual different types of training sessions and where they fall in that spectrum. So if you look here, first we're going to look at the blue box over here. So if you remember earlier, we had our endurance, we had our speed, and we had our recovery sessions. So in the endurance sessions, we have long, slow distance, progressive runs, and aerobic tempos. So what is a long, slow distance run? It's in the name. We're going to go out for a long period of time or a long distance. I personally like to program it for about a certain amount of time, and we're going to do it slowly. We aren't looking at pushing the pace in a long, slow distance run. You're going out there, you should be able to chat. If we go back to over here, we want it to be sort of in that zone 2 base endurance predominantly, maybe dipping into the aerobic tempo as well. If we look at the effort, it's a 3 out of 4. It means I can go out with my friends, I can have a good time, I can chat. I don't need to think about how hard that run is. Then we've got a progressive run, similar to a long, slow distance run, but what happens is we start in those lower intensity zones, maybe a zone 2, and we get harder and harder and harder. We start running faster and faster and faster as we run. End of the session, probably finishing at our actual race pace, maybe for the last few kilometers of the session. And then finally, we've got our aerobic tempo. So if we look over here, we've got an aerobic tempo zone. So that means we're going to be working in that green zone over there, about 70 to 80% of maximal heart rate. Obviously, it's going to differ from person to person slightly, especially based on your fitness levels. But we're going to spend time in those zones. What those zones are good for, it's really good at developing that high intensity aerobic capacity, lactate clearance, and being able to sort of feel easy when you're running at a relatively fast pace. Then if we look at more of our speed zones, we're probably not going to have enough time to go through all of them, so I'm just going to highlight some of the most important ones. We've got our threshold runs, and that's when we go out at our race pace. Going to be hard, going to be difficult, but it's going to improve how long we can hold our race pace. Fartlek literally translates to fun with speed. That's when I'm going to go out. I'm going to mix and match my pace, maybe for a minute going really fast, a minute medium, a minute slow, and I'm going to cycle that through. High intensity intervals, so these are often performed on a track or out on a flat piece of road. I'm trying to operate in that red zone, anywhere from sort of 1 minute to 6 minutes, 7 minutes. They're really tough, and they really get the heart rate going. Then we've got our speed sessions on the track. That's trying to build our maximal speed. If we build our maximal speed, our slow speeds will feel easier, and we'll also have that burst to maybe kick in a race. Then we've got our hill repeats, where we're going to go up and down the hills. These are really good for building our running strength, making our legs stronger, being able to endure better, our muscular endurance. We're going to get into that in the strength training section. But they're going to basically help you feel better along the hills and just better in general when you run, because you're going to have legs that can endure for a lot longer. And then finally, our time trials. That's going out, 4 to 8Ks maybe, trying to run as fast as we can. We often just use them as a metric on, is our training program working really well? Are we improving, or can we change it? We just need to, every 2 to 3 months, throw in a time trial to see how well we're doing. And then finally, we've got our technique sessions under recovery, so it's practicing technique, mainly with running drills. Then a flush out run, 15 to 20 minutes. We mentioned it already, pretty easy. And maybe a slightly longer recovery run. That's just going out 30, 40 minutes, nice and easy. Could even include a little bit of walking. And finally, we're going to chat about our periodization. So if we look over here, what is periodization? Okay, so periodization is basically the plan, the overall plan for our training. It's how we get from point A to point B. Point B being our goal with our running, whether that be a 5K personal best, finishing your first half marathon, or finishing the comrades. Now, the way we go about it is we actually like to take our training year, because hopefully you're not just going to decide to run a half marathon a week before it begins. You're going to decide a while in advance, but we like to split it up into very specific phases. So we've got our base phase, our build phase, our competition phase, and our transition period. Okay, so the base phase is exactly that. We're trying to build that aerobic base that we spoke about earlier. It's going to be lots of long, slow distance running. Our build phase is when we're trying to increase the pace of our running a little bit and improve our ability to actually run faster, sort of just before the competition phase. Competition phase is where we're actually trying to sort of peak for our event. So we'll be running a lot more races, trying to perfect our racing strategy, and hopefully end up, on our main day, on our main goal day, on the starting line and, sort of prime condition. And then the transition period is just the period in between where you've done your main race and you're just letting the body recover, maybe doing cross training, not even really thinking about training. So if you look here at this graph, what we have here, it's actually our distribution of training across these phases. So it's the ratio that we should be spending in each of those zones that we mentioned earlier. So we've got green for our base and tempo zones, so it's aerobic zones, orange for our threshold zone, and red for our anaerobic zone or sprint zone, okay? So if you look, the trend throughout all of them is that we are mainly spending most of our time in those easier zones, those base aerobic zones, zones 2 and 3, with rather minimal time in zones 4 and 5, okay, our higher intensity zones and our threshold zones. As we get closer and closer to the competition period, decrease that amount of time in base slightly and increase the amount of time that we do our high intensity running. And that's just to gear us up for the actual racing and really progress the intensity side of things. And I think probably the number one thing that you can take away from this whole talk over here is the biggest mistake that I think almost any runner makes, if they haven't been lucky enough to have a good coach, is they spend far too much time in this orange zone over there, our threshold zone. So we often refer to it in the sports science world as the gray zone. It's because it's very exciting to go out almost as hard as you can for a certain distance, say 5K. You go one day, you run a certain time, say 25 minutes. You go the next time, you can do better because you practice running at that speed. You can do a 24-minute 5K. It's very addictive, that feeling of improvement. And so often people end up spending most of their training time going really hard. That rise and grind mentality, they think if I'm not trying, if I'm not pushing hard, then I'm not improving. And so we can look at that orange and we'll probably go all the way down to here and they spend the majority of the time there. That's not going to work for us. It's really hard on the body. So it's often going to lead to overuse injuries. And more than that, you're only actually working one phase. So you're only working one type of specific adaptation. You're going to lose out on everything you can get in those red and green zones over there. And so you're going to find that after a while, whether it be 1, 2, 3 years, you're really going to hit a plateau and your running's not going to improve that much. And people often think, oh, well, that's just my loss in running. Well, no, not really. Maybe if you spend some time in the other zones, you'll be able to do a little bit better. Okay, right. So that's me for now. Nick's going to join us again real quick. He's going to chat about running injuries. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, Ant. I hope everyone's enjoying the talk so far. This running injuries part is quite close to me. Obviously, being a biokineticist, this is what I deal with day in and day out. And I deal with a lot of runners that suffer from frustrating injuries, injuries that put them at wanting to quit running. And we should never get to that stage. I think a lot of it relates to what Ant has just spoken about, spending too much time in that orange zone and not doing enough easy specific running for what your body actually needs. So for this section, I'm going to be talking about just basic rehabilitation and management of running injuries. I'm going to give an overview of running injuries, and then I'm going to give you some actual exercises for you to do as part of a prehabilitation routine that will help you make sure that you're targeting all those small finicky muscles in order to help you get on the road quicker if you're struggling with a niggle, or make sure that you don't get to the point where you struggle with these issues. So, principles of running injuries. Now, I like to start in the middle because running injuries, there's two types of running injuries, and sports injuries in general. You get your acute injuries and your chronic injuries. Most of us long distance runners will suffer from a chronic injury. As Anne said, around about 75% of runners will suffer from an injury throughout their training year. That is a huge amount, guys. So the chronic injuries is really where it gets quite frustrating. The other part of it is the fact that a chronic injury builds up over a period of time. It builds up over months, sometimes years. But it often takes an incident to trigger it. Now, you're a runner. You've been doing, let's say if you're a comrades training runner, you've been doing 100 kilometers a week of training. And now, all of a sudden, you go on a run and you get knee pain. Let's call it outside of the knee pain, the typical RTB runner's knee. Now, you think, well, hell, I haven't done anything different. My running has been completely the same. I've just been progressing. But now I've gone on this run, and this has caused my problem. What was the issue? Well, often the issue is that you've been probably running incorrectly or been doing something wrong, but it's been taking a long time to get to this point. And it's frustrating because you can't pinpoint what the issue is. The other frustrating part is that, take this. I often say to my patients, if you've been suffering for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for 2 months, whatever it is, it often means that it's going to take about that much time in order for you to get back to a point where you're completely recovered from that injury. That can be extremely frustrating if you've been going on and off for a year trying to manage an injury. And now I'm telling you it's going to take a year to get the injury right. But you know, the thing about injuries and the frustrating part is that they can come and go as they please. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're completely recovered. It just means that sometimes you go through phases in a rehabilitation protocol where you feel better and you feel worse. An example, someone comes in, they've got an issue, let's call it the RTB again, because that's a very common one and one that most of you can relate to. And now you do rehabilitation for a good couple of weeks, and now all of a sudden they're feeling good. They feel like they can run, they don't have any pain, they want to go and run. Now they go and run and they feel no pain. Now what does that tell them? What does their brain tell them? We're okay, we can go running again. Now the first common mistake that people do in a rehabilitation is they don't take into account, they sort of just forget how bad it used to be. You start to remember how good it was, and now you want to go and run straight away, but you forget that it's a process. It takes a long time. And often you end up in the cycle of overuse. You end up in a cycle where you are sore, irritated, inflamed, take time off, do your rehabilitation, not enough of it, go back into exercising, back into your running full time, injured. Again, stop, go through that cycle. Now, the important thing about that is you have to manage that injury correctly, but also you have to do some rehabilitation before you get to that injury. Prevention is better than cure. And human society in general is very much a reactive society. We react to something, we get injured, now we got to do something about it. But if there was one thing that would help your running longevity, it would be being proactive about your rehabilitation. So the exercises that I'm going to be showing you shortly are little golden nuggets to make sure that you never end up in a physio's room. Well, I say never, at least less often. Okay, so we'll get to that now. But on my chronic injury side, I've got tendinopathies and degeneration. Now, tendinopathy is one of the most common injuries that I see. And what is it? I've said a tendon joins a muscle to a bone. The tendinopathy is essentially an irritation of that tendon. Whether that muscle's overloaded, whether the muscle's not functioning well enough, whether the joint is too unstable, it causes an irritation of the tendon. Over time, this can become extremely harmful to that muscle to the point where the tendon may even tear. This often happens in your Achilles tendon. Achilles tendinopathy, very common in runners. Now, how do we manage that tendon? Because often with a tendinopathy, it's this niggle, you get out of bed in the morning, you feel a little bit sore, you walk around, you warm up, you feel a lot better. You go for your run, $100, you feel great. You then stop with your run, and now your body starts to cool down, it starts to get really sore. Maybe an hour after you've done this perfect 10K, you're hobbling around because your Achilles is so sore. That's a tendinopathy. Now, how do you deal with tendinopathy? Well, there's very specific ways in which you train in order to target the tendon and load it correctly so that it becomes better. But often a tendinopathy can be managed in season. And what I mean by that, you don't have to take time off running. You can probably keep running at a lower volume and still get through your rehab and make sure that your tendon sort of heals itself. Degeneration is the other aspect of chronic injuries. Degeneration often happens within a joint where you get maybe your cartilage, meniscus in the knee, wearing out. Over time, obviously, we're putting load through our body, and that degeneration could cause all kinds of issues in the longevity of our runs. So those are things that you need to take into account from a chronic perspective. Acute, I'll briefly touch on because it's important, and a lot of acute injuries are also due to a chronic overload, but like I said, they sometimes feel a lot more acute. I've put here muscle tears and joint sprains. Now, for a muscle tear, a long distance runner doesn't necessarily suffer very much from muscle tears. They do in the sense of when they maybe do speed work that they weren't fully prepared for, maybe they're overloading their body, maybe they're stressed and fatigued. All those factors matter, and I'll speak about the factors that lead to injury after this. But essentially, sprint athletes are more prone to your type of acute injury, muscle tear from a powerful movement, sprinting off the blocks, hamstrings. I mean, how often have you watched a 100-meter race in the Olympics, which we should be watching at this time of the year? How often have you watched a 100-meter race where an athlete has been training for an entire year leading up to this event and they pull up short of the hamstring? That's more likely to happen in those types of races because the stakes are much higher, and also the power production through each movement is a hell of a lot higher than what it would be on a long distance run. But I've put muscle tears there because they're very important and they sort of crisscross. I mean, a muscle tear that's not healed correctly can then turn into a chronic type injury that chronically bugs you for a hell of a long time. We also have their joint sprains. Joint sprains are a common acute injury, and you often see this in runners where they maybe step funny or they hit a pothole, especially in our South African roads, or step off a curb funny, and it causes maybe a twist of their ankles. Now, an ankle twist would lead to an acute injury. But if not managed correctly, that acute injury, because now you're going to walk funny or you're going to try run funny, is going to cause a chronic injury somewhere else. So you can see how it's very easy to separate the two, but also quite a gray area. There's a big gray area in between that I'm not even talking about. But essentially, sports injuries, what does it come down to? Well, you got your extrinsic factors and your intrinsic factors. Now, easily put, extrinsic is your outside factors. Now, we'll talk about those. Training surface. Training surface, an extremely important outside factor. I mean, if you're running on the road, if you're running on the track, if you're running on grass, all those put different loading demands on your body. Now, if you're a runner that's used to running trail, and then you take it and decide to start just doing road running, your body's not used to that. That simple shift can cause a problem. Running shoes. I've mentioned briefly running shoes, and I'm no podiatrist, so I'm not going to be giving running shoe advice, but definitely you have to find the right running shoe for you. If you don't have the right running shoe that suits your running style, the way your foot works, and the way your biomechanics work, you're in trouble. Road camber, especially in our country, South Africa, we have serious road camber, and running on the same side of a road, which you're often told to run counterclockwise, counter traffic, it means that you're always running on the same camber when you're going one way and when you're coming back. And that consistent overload of shortening one side, lengthening one side can definitely cause issues. Programming, overload, too much too soon. All of those fit in together. Ant has spoken about that. Too much too soon is often the term that you hear. I generally say in progression of programming, you should be adhering to a 10 to 15% rule in terms of increasing your weekly mileage. And that doesn't mean that now I run 10 today, and then tomorrow I can do 11, the next day I can do 12, 13, 14, and increase that way. I would look at my weekly mileage. I'll say I've done 50 kilometers this week. Next week, it's okay to increase it to 55 or 57. Don't take too much of a jump because that will lead to an extrinsic factor to injury. Cross-training. Now, it's a little bit controversial because a lot of what we're trying to bring through to you guys is how important cross-training is in having a well-balanced body and running longevity. But the wrong type of cross-training, that's what's going to cause you a problem. Now, if you're going in the gym lifting extremely heavy weights that your body's not prepared for, that type of cross-training is going to get you injured. Peer pressure, often seen in running clubs especially, but runners in general subside to peer pressure at once in their lifetime. Now, I mean, I've been there. There's been times where I didn't want to run that 20K, that 30K, because all I'd ever done was 15 and I was nowhere near ready for it. But your friends are like, no, we got to go, come, so you do it. Luckily enough, touch wood, I've never been injured, but I've seen a lot of people get injured that way. So peer pressure definitely affects it. And the last thing, and it's certainly not the least because it's extremely important, life stresses. There's so many life stresses. Running is a great way to get rid of those life stresses. But if you're not getting enough sleep, if work is crazy, you're not happy at home, like all of those things play up in your mind and therefore play up in your body. And that can definitely affect extrinsic factors. We get onto the intrinsic, so the inside factors, guys. Inside factors, those, look, you're born with them. You can correct them if you are aware of them. So remember, it goes back to that unconscious awareness of what we were talking about. You becoming aware of what your body does, how it moves through space, and how to move correctly. So intrinsic factors, I've got the first one, biomechanics. Now, what is biomechanics? It's essentially how your body moves. Now, if your body moves incorrectly, or if you have incorrect biomechanical patterns, and what I mean by that is certain parts of your body are not working well together in order to drive in a specific way, or certain muscles are overactive, some muscles underactive, tightnesses within the joints, those are all things that we'll talk about, but also they'll become quite evident as we go through the actual exercises, how that can affect your issues. Running technique. We've touched on running technique. I don't need to go about that, but you can clearly see how that can be an inside factor to running injuries. Muscular imbalance. Now, muscles work together. No one muscle works in isolation unless you try to asymmetrically engage a muscle. But when a muscle shortens, another muscle lengthens. To give an example of a bicycle, let me give you an example of a leg movement. So if I had to bring my heel up towards my bum, when I do this, my hamstring shortens to bring my heel up towards my bum. What's allowing that shortening? My quadricep and hip flexor. My quadricep and hip flexor are allowing the stretch to happen. So the front is stretching, the back is extending. Now, all of these things play a part. Now, if those muscles aren't working well together, or if one muscle works over time and other muscle is too tight, and now because you're too tight, you're having to change the way your body moves, that will lead to an injury. Lack of mobility. Mobility, guys. I'll briefly touch on mobility. I've got a little bit of time. Mobility versus flexibility. What is that? Well, flexibility is if I pull my foot as high up as I can, as far as my body physically allowed, that's flexibility. But if I try to lift my leg up as high as I can on my own, that's mobility. So mobility is more controlled movement. How much range of movement do you have under your own control? Whereas flexibility is how much range of movement could you possibly push your body into. And obviously having a lack of mobility could cause other muscles to fire funny and create problems down the kinetic chain. Poor body awareness, lack of coordination. That also leads to muscles not working correctly. You see a lot of people, sometimes they can be a little bit clumsy and you just play it down to, oh, I've always been like that. But you can train these things. You can connect your mind to your body and perform movements that maybe were not within your reach before, just through practice. Kinetic chain. Kinetic chain, it's very similar to biomechanics, but essentially it's kinetic chain is how the power moves throughout your body's kinetic chain, essentially meaning between the joints, the muscles, the bones, the tendons, the ligaments, how power moves throughout that. And recovery status. Recovery status meaning if you're not allowing your body to recover enough in between high quality sessions, you might feel good short term, like Ant mentioned, but over time, that recovery status or lack thereof is going to catch up with you and is going to lead to an injury of some sort. So now, guys, we're going to be moving to your prehab toolbox. I'm going to ask Leah to come on, and we're going to be going over some very basic exercises. So I hope you can all see us nicely. I'm going to ask Leah to lie on her back. This is our everyday runner, Leah.
Hello.
And personal trainer. So what we're going to do, guys, is I'm going to take you through a few of those things. You don't have to worry if you can't see the screen too much. We're going to be talking through it. But essentially, we're going to be going through specific areas and key parts of muscle engagement and prehabilitation exercises. My first go-to with any exercise or rehabilitation of any sort of injury is lumbar pelvic stability, your core engagement. Now that is extremely important because that is where most of our stability originates at, and that's where a lot of our power comes from. So for lumbar pelvic stability, I'm going to go through a very basic engagement. The first thing that I like to do is a 3-point movement. I call it a 1, 2, 3. So what I'm going to ask Leah to do in this position is I'm going to ask you to rotate her lower back into the floor. Guys, if you're at home trying this out, please, you're welcome to pop off some questions if you have. We're going to keep the core as tight as we can. So how we're going to get that happening is after she rotates the tummy into the floor, I'm going to ask her to suck her belly button away from my hand. She should be feeling this tension happening in and around the abdominal area. What I'm then going to ask her to do is try and activate her pelvic floor muscles. Now, her pelvic floor muscles activate. The easiest way to engage is to think about, imagine like you're going to the bathroom, you get to your bathroom, but you can't actually go. There's a long queue, so now you've got to wait. So whilst you wait, what do? You hold everything in. So I'm going to ask Leah to hold everything in. And she's got this nice sort of core engagement. Guys, there's many different ways to engage your lumbar pelvic region. This is just my favorite one because it keeps your back in a nice, safe position, but it also teaches you to separate. You can relax. It also teaches you to...
I'm used to waiting for the bathroom, I'm a girl.
You should be getting this nicely, guys. I mean, if you practice this, it's very easy in a lying down position. But obviously, we don't run lying down. So there's other ways to do it. We're going to get Leah standing up. The standing position is the best way to do it because obviously it's more specific to running. And nothing really changes. What I'm going to ask her to do is imagine that she's pushing the lower back into the floor. So she's straightening her lower back. She's going to suck her belly button up. She's going to suck everything up from the floor. She's going to keep her back nice and straight. And now she's got the nice core engagement. And you can relax. Now, when I say try and engage your core whilst running, that's extremely difficult because you're basically squeezing so tight in that position that you can't breathe. And now you're thinking so much about your core, you can't think about your technique. So the core is something that you have to practice on a daily basis. The more you practice it throughout your day with things that you do a lot in that day, the easier it's going to get. So every time you sit, every time you stand up, every time you pick something up from the floor, whenever you're driving, every time you get to a red robot, whatever it is, if you're at your desk all the time, whenever you get an email, try and associate it with things you do a lot of. I'm then going to go over a couple of actual core exercises that are going to help improve coordination as well as core mobility throughout the entire chain. So I'm going to ask Leah to get onto her hands and knees. On these hands and knees positions, she's going to engage her core again. She's going to rotate slightly, suck her belly button up, suck everything up from the pelvic floor. It's quite difficult to do it in this position. I'm going to ask her to squeeze her shoulder blades. So now she's got a nice and flat back. From this position, I'm going to ask her to lift her left arm up into the air, her right leg up into the air. I always tell my patients, imagine like you've got a nice hot cup of tea on your back. You don't want to spill it. Or if it's a Friday, a nice cold beer. And you keep that on your back, you don't want to spill it. So make sure you're keeping your core nice and tight and slowly bring it down. And then I'm going to ask her to swap it around and hold it nice and flat. This is called your cat dog. And it's a very nice exercise. You can relax now to get the coordination of the core. So teach your body how to maintain the stability whilst performing movement. And if you can get that, then you're one step of the way to engaging your core whilst running. The last movement in the for the lumbar pelvic stability, which is an advancement of this, would be your bear hold. So what I'm looking for, again, is a core engagement, setting of the shoulders. I'm then going to ask Leah to slightly lift off her knees off the floor. Holding this position, nice and tight, she's going to hold the core. Just holding this position is tough enough. But then what you can do from there is perform the cat dog in the exact same movement. Or even just simply ask her to lift off, but too advanced, yeah? Ask her to just lift off 1 foot off the ground. So you can modify it to suit your needs, guys. You can relax here. So I hope that covers the lumbar pelvic region. I mean, there's tons. I mean, I could spend hours and hours on giving you exercises, but these are 3 very basic exercises that will help you get your core nice and strong. We're then going to get to your glutes. Now ask Leah to lie on her back. Now, your glutes, guys, like I said, extremely important in power production. They drive you forward, but often non-utilized. We spend most of our days sitting down, deactivating those muscles. We're shortening the hip flexors. Now, if you're one of those that doesn't feel like your glutes work half the time, if you had to do a squat, you feel your quadriceps working, these exercises are for you. So the first thing we're going to do is a hip thrust. So for your hip thrust, it's essentially a bridge position. We're going to suck the core in again. Core is important. As I mentioned it, that is why I started with it. With all the other exercises, we have to think about the core as well. Holding the core nice and tight, I'm going to ask you to push weight through your heels and drive the bum straight up in the air. Make sure you feel for the bum. You feel the squeeze. The squeeze of the buttocks is what drives the hips up. I'm then going to ask you to slowly lower it and lift it back up again. Nice and powerful up, slowly down. Power up, slowly down. Relax. This is an example of a hip thrust, and the hip thrust needs to come from the glutes. If you're not feeling your glutes, think about them. Try and create that mind-body connection. We're then going to move to the clams. Now, for the clams, we're going to be utilizing a band. Simple glute band. If you've got a long TheraBand, you can tie it around. We also sell these on our online store. Very great and useful for exercises. So, you're going to put these around your knees, directly over the kneecaps. I'm going to ask Leah to lie sideways, facing that way. Good. So I'm going to ask you to get her feet in line with the bum, knees in front, body nice and aligned. I often say, if I'm a bird, looking from a bird's eye view, I only want to see each body part. So I don't want to see her rotating as she does this movement. I'm going to keep this position. I'm going to tell her I need her to squeeze her bum, squeeze her heels. The byproduct of that is the opening of the knees. So you're going to squeeze, open and close. Open and close. Very difficult exercise, guys. Important that it comes from the glutes. So keep on thinking. I'm squeezing my bum. The byproduct of that is the opening of the knees. Important here, and you'll see I'm trying to push into Leah's buttocks, is to make sure that she doesn't get lazy. Because if I'm not there, you'll see she's going to start opening her hips up. It's very important. So at home, what you can do is literally place yourself next to a wall. So you don't allow yourself to rotate. Those are your clams. Do it. You should be feeling your glute working. You don't want to feel your RTD burning. A lot of people feel it in the quads, hamstrings. It needs to come from the bum. So think about it. Right. We're then going to get onto our glute walks. So what I'm going to ask Leah to do is keep the band on. She's going to stand up. Just move a little bit forward, please. Let's move this backwards. And you're going to do your glute walk across the front chest. So face forward. That way. Okay. So we're going to start the glute walk. I'm just going to move this now. For the glute walk, please stand up normally. Naturally getting into that position. Keep your feet shoulder width apart. You're going to keep your tummy nice and tight. Send your bum slightly backwards so you engage in your glutes. Feel the pressure of the knees pushing outwards. Grip the floor with your feet. Get the feet engaging. Now you're slowly going to step out one way. Take a few steps that way. Then you're going to come back. So guys, you can take 5 steps one way, 5 steps the other way. You can go 20 steps one way, 20 steps the other way. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter at all. You're going until your glutes are burning. And again, try to isolate them. Try to think about the glutes. Try not let those quads take over. Excellent. We're going to take that band off. That covers our glutes exercises. So we went over some glute max exercises and some glute stabilizing exercises. We're now going to get on to the hamstrings. So, hamstrings, my favorite and easiest exercise to do, hamstring bridge. Going to get Leah lying on her back. Now, these are very similar to the thrusters. You can do the thrusters along with this. But this one here, I want you to take into account that it's more of a hamstring exercise than it is a glute exercise because of this simple hack. So what you're going to do is you're going to engage, suck, drive up, squeeze the bum. The important thing here that gets the hamstrings engaging is imagine that you're pulling your heels towards yourself. Pull nice and strong. That engages the hamstrings. Hold it. And you can relax. Now you'll feel the glutes. You'll feel the hamstrings. And you might even feel your calves. But guess what? That's your posterior chain. So wonderful that all of those are working. I'm going to ask Leah to stand up. We're going to move the mat out the way. We're going to get onto the divers now. The diver is a very nice exercise because it works on coordination, works on your balance. It also loads your hamstring in an elongating way. We call it eccentric, which basically is a much better way of loading a muscle. It increases your muscle strength. It also allows your muscle to lengthen whilst it works in order to get the best out of it. You often get a lot of muscle pain, so DOMS, delayed muscle soreness, but that's all good. It means that the muscle's adapting. So this is an example of a diver. What I'm looking for is, again, nice and tight core, Leah's going to have her arms above her head, and she's going to imagine like she's diving into a pool. She's going to dive into that pool. She's going to keep her back nice and straight and come up. Just go sideways for me. Towards it. Yep. Core tight, setting the shoulders, driving forwards. This leg is coming right up. This hamstring is nice and straight. She needs to try and hold her balance whilst doing it. I am guiding her. Whilst she's down at this bottom position, she's driving through the glutes and hamstring, back up to the top. Slowly driving down, back up to the top. The movement comes from the hamstring, comes to the glutes. It's really, really nice all-round exercise. And I'm sure if you're trying it at home, you're really feeling that one work. The last one of the hamstrings, guys, is one of my favorites, but it's quite a challenging one. It's your hamstring Nordics. This exercise is often used by many athletes in order to develop that eccentric power of the hamstring. What I'm going to do is hold Leah's feet down onto the floor. Now, if you don't have someone doing this for you, all you do is you tuck your feet underneath a coffee table or something that's going to hold them in that position. And what I'm going to ask Leah to do is keep her core tight, keep her back straight, and put her arms out in front of her, because these are going to help her slowly lower herself to the floor. So she's slowly going to bend from her knees. She's going to push her heels up into my hand, and she's slowly going to drop down. Very good. Once she gets down, she's going to push herself back up with her hands. Now, as you can see, it's loading the hamstrings, keeping her back nice and straight. I'm going to do it one more time. Slowly load and come back up. What you're noticing that's happening with Leah is she's slightly bending her hips as she's going forward. And a lot of you, when you first try this out, that's also going to happen. Yeah, or we saw that exactly in a running technique. So what does that tell us? There's a lot of weakness in that kinetic chain. This particularly tells us that the hamstring is quite weak because she's having to bend at the hips to deload the hamstring and maybe try and utilize her bum to help her a bit more. So all these little things, even during these exercises, we can get quite a lot of feedback and understand exactly what's going wrong. So now, we're going to go with the calf raises, the calf exercises. So we're going to move this out the way. For your calf exercises, I'm just going to give you an example of a bench. Now you can do this on the floor, but the nice thing about a step is, you can hold on to me, is that you can deload, so you can drop below the step level. What that does is it loads that calf eccentrically, it loads that Achilles tendon eccentrically. So you drive up nice and quick and slowly drop down. Nice and quick up, slowly drop down. So that's how you perform a calf raise. There's no point in performing the movement at the one monotonous pace. Focus on the quality of the movement rather than the quantity of the movement. Now I'm going to ask you to take a seat on the step. And although this is not calf specific, it's lower leg specific. We're going to go for some toe taps. So I'm going to ask Leah to keep her heels directly underneath the knees, and she's going to slap her toes into the floor. Want to hear it? All right. Perform about 20 to 30 to 40 repetitions of these, guys, and your shins are going to burn. But guess what? That shin muscle is probably weak, so you need to work on it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. You can come with the camera. And now, we were going to get Leah to do the skipping, but she wasn't comfortable with skipping on camera at this pace that we're asking her to. So, Ant, our skipping pro, is going to come here. And I think go a little bit further forward, Ant. Cool. Now, guys, hold on, Ant. Hold on. Jumping the gun. Okay. Guys, why are we skipping? Skipping is an extremely important exercise. It gets our entire kinetic chain working, but it also helps us practice what? Our ground contact time. Remember that term that we spoke about? Spending time on the ground. So you can skip and spend a long time on the ground, or you can skip and spend little time on the ground. That makes a big difference. That teaches your body to spend a little time on the ground. So skipping helps your body understand how to react with the force into the ground and drive you forward, which is what we need in running. So this is an example of what, maybe give us the high impact, slower skipping first, and then high impact. Not a great one, okay. But this is what we're looking for, guys. Nice and quick reaction off the ground. The feet are just tapping the floor, and they're not spending very much time on the ground. What's driving them up is actually the elastic energy that gets stored in those tendons and drives them back up into the air. That's cool, and thank you very much. We managed to get almost the whole way. All right. The last and final set of exercises, guys, is your kinetic chain exercises. So for your kinetic chain, like I said, it's how your whole body sort of comes together. So there's going to be 3 exercises related to the kinetic chain that I'm going to be speaking about. So the first one is your runner's lunge. Now, a runner's lunge is one of my favorite exercises for runners because it teaches you coordination for running. It also gives you an idea of where your weaknesses are, whether your glutes engaging, whether you're feeling the right muscles working, whether your upper body is connecting nicely to the lower body. So Ant's just going to demonstrate a couple of runner's lunges for me, and I'm going to speak. That's it. So you can see he's holding his pose at the top, slowly lowering back his weight backwards, but his weight stays on his front leg as he slowly drives down and powerfully surges up, showing it from the side. You're able to see how he sends his weight, well, he sends his leg back, but his weight very much stays over his front leg, and then he utilizes his hamstring, glute, calf, triple extension to drive all the way up. At the same time, he's keeping his core nice and tight and staying nice and stable. There's no too much shifting going on. Thank you, Ant. The next movement is the world's best stretch. One of Ant's favorites. Favorite movements? Nah. Here. So guys, the world's best stretch is an extremely nice mobility exercise or movement that is going to help you open up a whole bunch of areas. Essentially, it works nicely on opening up your hips. It teaches you how to translate that energy and that movement between your hips and your upper body. It also works on exchanging the strength, the lengthening process of that hamstring quite nicely. So the reason why it's called the world's best stretch is because it really just does a whole bunch of goodness for very little work. So Ant's going to get into this position. He's essentially into a very deep lunge. He's putting his body weight directly to the right hand. He's trying to reach his elbow down to the floor. He's then going to look up towards the ceiling, open it right up. Once he holds that position for a couple of seconds, he's then going to push back by putting his hand into his foot, pushing his bum up to the ceiling, and getting a stretch onto the hamstring. Just going to repeat it one more time. Elbow down, 2 seconds. Up to ceiling, 2 seconds. Hand on foot, 2 seconds. And push back, 2 seconds. There we go. World's best stretch. Nicely demonstrated. The last one was the hard one. The tricky one, the aeroplanes. So guys, very similar to the diver that Leah showed us, but it's going to add a lot more coordination and a lot more variation of movement. So without any further ado, he's going to keep 1 foot up. He's going to get his hands out to the sides, and he's slowly going to send himself into essentially a diver. But once he's here, I'm going to ask him to twist from the hip to touch 1 foot, and almost twist from the other hip to touch the other foot. Come back up, slowly drop down, rotate, tap, rotate, tap. So what's happening here, guys? Getting nice elongation into that hamstring, working that hamstring as he's driving back up, but he's also working on the mobility of his torso as to how it moves with the lumbar-pelvic region. So that's a really nice exercise to sort of put your entire kinetic chain in order. Guys, the last thing that I want to just touch on before we move on to the last section of today's workshop and section of today's workshop is foam rolling. And you can stay with me here. Now, when you think of foam rolling, this is what most of you see. So think of one of these long foam rollers that you see at your gym. Now, although this foam roller is great, I prefer something along the lines of a softball. Nice little ball, gets the work done. Also easier to carry around with you. Maybe keep it in your bag for after a race or before a race to warm up. I'm just going to give you an idea of how to roll the glute, because the glutes often get stiff and is often overworked. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Ant to sit on this little ball. He's going to love that. You're going to take a seat. Putting 1 bum cheek onto the ball. He's going to cross his foot. That's the body weight of the ball is on that same leg. He's going to cross that foot over. He's going to find the sore spots. Now, here's the thing, guys. When you roll, you don't just roll up and down. If you're trying to roll for mobility, if you're trying to roll for releasing a muscle tightness, you want to find one of those sore spots. Once you have a sore spot, you hold it for 20 to 30 seconds. You're going to feel that area sort of go a little bit numb. It's going to feel a lot nicer afterwards. But the reason why it's going numb is because you're decreasing the blood flow. So that's what foam rolling, and that's how foam rolling works. You find the sore spot, you hold it. that decreases the blood flow to that area. And then what happens when it moves off of it is an influx of blood, an influx of nutrients, and allows that muscle to just recover. So the rolling, as you can see, he's rolling his calf now. You could roll your calf, hamstring, hip flexor, glute, even in the upper body. It's really, you could do it anywhere. It's an extremely nice thing to do and a nice way to recover in between tough workouts. So I'm going to leave you with that part of the rehabilitation and management. And we're just going to go back to the camera, back to the slideshow. And the next part is going to be introduced by Ant with the strength training. And guys, just quickly, if you do have any questions, I know you guys, a lot of you have been commenting on the video so far. We are going to do a Q&A afterwards, so hold on to those questions. We're going to sit down and have a nice Q&A with anyone who is interested in finding out something that maybe we didn't touch on. Right, enjoy, thanks.
Perfect. Okay, sharp, Nick. Getting me tired before that chat. Okay, so strength training, running. So I think strength training has typically had a pretty rocky relationship with running over the years. I know that a lot of runners are actually a little bit scared of strength training, and that's just because of a few sort of misunderstandings or myths about it. So we're going to chat about those first. So over here, I've just got 3 myths of strength training and running. So the first myth, the biggest fear of all runners, strength training is going to make me perform worse. It's going to make me worse of a runner. It's going to impact my training, and it's going to make me run badly. Okay? This is totally not true. In fact, lots of research has been done on that, and very new research, very good scientific articles, and it all shows that strength training actually improves many facets of our running performance. So these are things such as our running speed, not just our actual maximal sprinting speed, but also our speed at our VO2 max. Remember, I spoke about that earlier. The highest intensity that we can hold for 3 to 6 minutes, so it's going to improve that, and your speed's above lactate threshold. It's also going to improve our time trial performance and speeds at lactate threshold, which is pretty great. And it's also going to improve our running economy, which is basically, as Nick mentioned earlier, how efficiently we run. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. And secondly, big fear, and a very big fear of a lot of runners, that strength training is going to make me bulky and heavy. It's going to make me put on too much muscle. This is also more of a misunderstanding because, yes, you can put on a lot of muscle with the right kind of strength training. But remember, we spoke about specificity earlier on in the seminar. And, that means that what we're actually doing, we're not trying to become strength athletes in the gym. We're actually runners. And then that's going to lead to a cross-training effect, for the adaptations we can get from strength training. So we're going to spend a lot more time in our week running than we are going to strength train. And that's going to sort of cancel out those strength gains. Another reasons why we're not going to put on too much muscle is also because the frequency required to actually elicit all those nice adaptations we can get from strength training for running is too low to really sort of give us what we call a hypertrophy stimulus. So that's a muscle gaining stimulus. We simply don't need to train enough times in the week in order to put on too much muscle, so we need to improve our running performance. And then finally, we just look at it, strength training will get me injured. So this is also another really big fear. A lot of runners are actually scared that if they step foot in the gym, they do exercises like the squat or the deadlift or a bench press or something, that it's going to cause injury. And, that can be quite intimidating exercises, so that's pretty understandable. But, as Nick mentioned earlier, up to 75% of runners can experience an injury within a year. That's actually one of the highest rates of injuries out of any sport. And strength training has been heavily researched in this area, and it's been shown that strength training can actually reduce the incidence of chronic injuries. So that's injuries we sustain over a long period of time by up to 50%, which is pretty massive. So it's going to take that 75% all the way down sort of into the 50s. Another thing to think about as well is that not a large number of injuries actually occur in a gym environment. There's been research done on that too. It's actually a pretty safe environment as long as you do it properly, and especially if you do it with guidance. With a real professional looking over you, you should be pretty safe. Okay, so now we've chatted about strength training actually can help me in my running. It can make me faster. It can stop injuries. But how does it do that? So we've got a number of different areas of our physiology that strength training actually impacted here. So the first one we're going to look at is muscular strength. So what is strength? It's pretty intuitive, but it's the maximal amount of force that a muscle can generate. Now, why is this important to running? So I'm just first going to use an example of, say, a squat. So say that my maximum squat, my 1 rep max, the heaviest squat I can perform is 50 kilograms. If I were to squat 40 kilograms, that's a pretty high percentage of 50 kilograms. It's 80%. It's going to feel pretty heavy. But then I do a few weeks, some really good quality training. That 50 kilogram max jumps all the way up to 80 kilograms. Now I can squat 80 kilograms max. That 40 kilograms is suddenly 50% of the maximum amount I can lift. It's going to feel a lot lighter than when it was 80% of my maximum lift. Now the same applies to our bodies. If we can improve our strength without increasing our weight too much, as we mentioned earlier, our weight shouldn't increase too much with strength training, our body's going to feel lighter when we run. So it's actually going to be easier for us to keep ourselves going. It's not going to be as taxing to move when we run. Okay, next is muscle endurance. So if we look at that, what is that? It's the actual endurance within a muscle itself. It's basically the amount of work a specific muscle can do, say my quads, before it fatigues. Okay? Obviously, this is very important for running. We don't want our quads to tire out. This is going to be especially important in things like hill running or just going for a long distance. You don't want the limiting factor of your exercise to be that you get a cramp because your quad is just absolutely done with you pushing it too hard for too long. Third, we're going to look at power. Power is basically how quickly I can do apply the force that I use. So it's how quickly I can apply my muscular strength. It's strength over time, if you want to look at it that way. It's a key factor in our running performance. When we're running, we're always actually constantly producing a certain amount of power. If I can be more powerful when I run, then I'm going to run faster. Same as with the strength. If my maximum power increases that I can run, then lower intensity, say at my lactate threshold, are going to feel easier when I run, and so I'm actually going to be able to hopefully go at that lactate threshold a little bit longer, and that's been shown. Then we have musculoskeletal elasticity. This is crucial. It's going to have a huge impact on our running economy. What does it mean? Nick spoke about tendons earlier as the things that join our muscles to our bones. Okay, that whole unit, the tendon and the muscle, is actually an elastic unit. It acts as a spring itself. If I can increase that elasticity, make my tendons and my muscles more springy, I'm going to get more power more easily. My muscle doesn't actually have to contract as hard to produce that power. And appropriate strength training and plyometric training increases what we call the compliance or the strength of our tendons and our muscles, and it makes them a lot more springy. So it's going to contribute to that. Then we're going to look at coordination. Now, obviously, everyone thinks of coordination as just how we actually perform a movement. And strength training will improve that for running if done appropriately. But we can actually also look at the coordination within the muscle itself, how the muscle itself contracts. Strength training allows our muscles to contract a lot more quickly, but also more fully. So we get a more complete muscle contraction. And it's a lot easier for us to do it. So what that means is that all our muscles are going to work together a lot easier to produce movement. And that's going to have a big impact on the final thing, our running economy. How much energy wastage we are using in our running. The higher your running economy means the less energy you waste. You don't want to waste energy. You don't want it going off into all sorts of different directions. We want it going forward. We're trying to go forward on our running. And all of these factors actually are going to help contribute to improving our running economy. Okay, so the next question, and it's a very common question that people ask all the time, especially now that they've realized that, hey, the strength training is pretty useful. How often do I actually need to strength train to get the benefits? And the good news is it's not a lot. Remember, we're runners. We are not strength athletes. We don't want to take away from our running. We want to add to it, okay? So research has shown that 2 to 3 times a week is adequate, but 2 times a week is more than fine. We don't actually need to go 3 times a week. Obviously, that principle of individuality, for different individuals, they might need to change their program slightly differently, but for most people, 2 times a week is going to get you there, okay? Now, the great thing about that is those 2 times, we don't even have to be big, long sessions. If we look at it, we only need to sort of work for about half an hour to a full hour's worth, of training each time. That could even be as little as 20 minutes. There are a lot of cases where we've seen just a 20-minute, very well-structured session having a huge beneficial impact, to a runner's performance. Now, obviously, another thing I didn't really speak about is that this number that we're doing, the amount of time we actually spend strength training is going to change throughout the season. So remember, we looked at that periodization graph earlier. As we get sort of into that peaking competition phase, we can expect it to decrease to maybe 1 or even 0 sessions a week in that final taper before the big race. So you don't have to really worry about the strength taking away from your running. Okay, so now what type of strength training should I actually do? There are all sorts of things out there. We've seen bodybuilders lifting. There are things like, CrossFit high-intensity interval training. You might have heard things like, high rep, low weight. What should I actually do to train? Well, there's that word again, specific. So strength training should be specific. So that means specific to running, firstly. Needs to be appropriate for runners. Specific to your goals as a runner. And also to you as an individual, ideally. If we can, if you can get a personal coach, that's great. And the actual training side of things, this sort of means performing movements that have a large transfer over to running. So these are movements that biomechanically are pretty similar to running. And it can be something like a squat that's adapted for running. Some people might think, oh, squat, that doesn't really look like it's effective for runners because it's going all the way down and up. There are actually ways to tweak certain movements and make them more appropriate for runners. Then we need to look at the actual sort of intensities of the exercises that we're doing. And what I want to look at is I want to try and get those adaptations that I mentioned earlier out of my movement. So I'm going to look at exercise intensities, and we're going to speak a little bit more about what these intensities do that match these adaptations. Remember, specific adaptations to imposed demands. I'm looking at exercise intensities that are going to hit these various different aspects. Okay? And then finally, just another reminder that we don't want the strength training to take away from our running. That means we don't want to perform things like bodybuilding style training. That is for bodybuilders, people that are interested in getting a certain look. We don't want to train like a powerlifter or a maximal strength athlete because we aren't one of those. We want to train appropriately for running. Okay, so what we have over here is the general structure, of a sort of a running strength training workout. This is something that it's very general that I would typically base my programming structure off for an athlete. Obviously, that principle of individuality, it's going to be slightly different for a complete novice strength athlete, someone who's never stepped foot in the gym, or for like an elite runner, it's going to be different again as well. But this is just a very sort of basic look at how I try to program a strength session for it being most effective and targeting all of those things such as muscular strength, power, etc. So we begin with a dynamic warm-up, starting from very light intensity exercises and progressing the intensity until we are ready to perform the movements in our actual workout. This is a really good time to get those prehab movements done. Nick went through a whole bunch earlier. They're all great. This is a really good time to slot them into the session. Then we're going to perform our plyometrics. So what are plyometrics? People often think that they're just jumping movements, but they're actually sort of jumping explosive movements. They can involve throws of the balls, sprints as well. Sprinting is a plyometric movement. Why do we do plyometrics? They are really, really, really good for developing our power. They're probably one of the #1 tools to develop our general elasticity and power. What's that going to do? It's going to have a really big impact on that ground contact time that Nick spoke about earlier because of the elasticity on your joints. That's also going to make that ground contact time more effective. You're going to transfer more force into the ground more effectively, hopefully, with the appropriate type of plyometric training. Then we'd move on to something like explosive strength training or strength training or strength endurance. Normally, for most people, we keep into this explosive strength zone. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Working on developing our power without overloading our bodies too much with a pure strength stimulus or a strength endurance stimulus that might break down our muscles and make us feel sore and achy and not able to train later on in the week. So these would be things like your squats, your lunges, push-ups, bench press, pull-ups, and we'll especially look at the speed at which we do those movements. Finally, we'd go with, for the actual workout part of the session, I like to finish off with some dynamic core. I use the word dynamic, meaning moving, or explosive core. I just find this a little bit more appropriate for runners than sort of just your static sort of planks and dish holds that we see. I like to get moving. I like to actually explosively utilize the core because when we're running, there's a lot of rotational forces going through our torso. If we want to go forward, we need to be able to control them and apply them effectively to help our running economy and our stride. And also sustain that over, like a 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 12-hour race if you, going to pump rates. And then we're going to finish with the cool down, some of our mobility work and foam running. That stuff to just help ease the muscle pains before the next training session and also help you keep your quality high on your actual running training sessions. Okay, so finally, before we go through some example exercises, I've now spoken about the general structure of a session. What should I actually be lifting? How many times should I be lifting it? How many sort of sets should I be doing? Repetitions, sets, and weights that we're going to use. Typically, I like to keep the workouts pretty short, so 5 to 7 exercises per session, normally at most. It can go all the way down to 3, 4 exercises per session. I keep a low to medium rep range, and that's going to be largely determined sort of by how hard we're pushing with each movement. We're going to get into that in a second. And I typically keep it between 2 and 4 sets per workout, depending on what I'm wanting to sort of get out of the activity. Then the weight depends purely on the goal of the exercise for me. So what I mean is we're going to take a look here now at this graph over here. So what this is a force and velocity graph. And it's actually a little bit intuitive. This line over here is looking at both our force and velocity. So if we look at it over there, when we have to apply a high amount of force, so that means a lot of strength, our velocity is going to be a lot lower. And that makes sense. If I were to take something like a bicycle and I were to try and bicycle a really heavy weight, like 50 kilograms, if I could even get it up, it's going to move up very slowly. If I take 1 to 2 kilograms or no weight at all, I can move very quickly, and it's going to be on that end of the spectrum. So heavy, forceful movements are going to be performed slower. Lighter movements can be performed a lot faster. Now, if we remember our principle of specificity, we adapt very specifically to the demands we place on the body. So different intensities and different movement speeds and weights we use along the curve are going to have a different impact on our bodies and adapt differently. If we go to this side over here, we see we have strength over here. We're going to be working at our maximal strength. If I go all the way to the other side where it's very light movements, but done very, very, very quickly, we're working our speed. If I go more to the middle, there is both a bit of weight. So I'm moving a decently heavy weight, but I'm trying to move it very quickly at the same time. That's where I'm going to be developing my power. And that's where I'm going to look at sort of what type of weights I'm going to be using in the session. With the rep count, 3 to 6 to 8 reps, maybe I'll use more on the strength to power side of things. Speed, I'm also going to keep relatively low, but that can go up maybe sometimes to 15 reps or literal sprinting. We sometimes do sprinting in our sessions. As always, with this type of training, we prefer to focus on the speed and the quality of the movement, so how we actually perform the movements, which is what we're going to get into next. Okay, so we're just going to go through a few exercises over here. Leah's going to join me. We're going to begin with some plyometric exercises first. Yeah. So the first one we're going to look at is pogo jumps. Okay, so a pogo jump is basically a progression from the skipping. It's a very basic plyometric movement. You see Leah's beginning here with nice straight legs, an upright body, and she's going to progressively increase the height of her jumps until we hit the working range. Working range means I want to maintain this height. We'll typically maintain this height between 10 and 15 reps. Stop. While she's getting a breather. So if we look over there, what we're trying to get there, Leah's legs were relatively stiff. There was very little bend in her knees and her hips. She was trying to work explosively out of the ankle. This is a really good drill to develop the elasticity, especially of the lower limbs, the strength of our Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon acts as a giant spring, as Nick spoke about earlier, propelling us forward when we run. So this is a really, really, really good exercise to work on elasticity. We normally wouldn't do more than 2 to 3 sets of this exercise in a session, because as you can see, it can be quite intense in the joints. That's something I did mention earlier with plyometrics. It's a type of training we have to be very careful with. We need to start right from the basics for most people because of the impact. It can really affect our joints, and if we do too much of it, it can lead to overuse injuries such as tendinopathies. Next, we're going to deal with the squat jump. I'm going to get this for a sec. So Leah's going to stand with her feet about hip width apart over here. She's nice, she's upright, she's got a neutral posture. Her core is not too engaged, it's a light engagement. We want her to think about being fluid and explosive. She's going to go down into a half squat, hands on hips, over there. Once she hits that quarter squat position, she's going to jump up as high as she can, and then land softly. By landing softly, I mean she's absorbing her weight through her knees, her hips, and her ankles, trying not to make such a big sound. Now, we can progress this movement to make it more continuous, or we can even add our arms into the movement, so throwing the arms down and up. So what that's going to do is going to increase the stretch on the movement and add speed to the movement, and you can see you can add a lot more power and height to the movement. And then finally, take a break. We're going to put the bar in back. If we have a really advanced athlete, we can even take it to the point where we add weight on. Imagine this is a barbell, and we can load up that athlete 30, 40, 50 kilograms. It would depend on how strong the athlete is, and we can really get a proper power stimulus. If you have extra weight on you when you're landing, as Nick mentioned earlier, if you're running, you're getting 3 to 4 times your body weight landing. Yeah, you're going to be getting 7 to 8 times your body weight landing. It's going to be a really good stimulus for those joints to get strong and elastic. Okay, next we're going to have our squat variations. So Leah is going to demonstrate a pretty classic squat for me here. Her feet are going to be a little bit wider, so just wider than shoulder width. The toes are going to point out slightly. She's going to be standing upright. She's going to activate her core, like how Nick mentioned earlier, putting in that belly button, slightly rounding the back over there so it's straight. She's going to sit her hips back and push her knees to her toes, sitting into a pocket in the squat. Maintaining a nice neutral spine. She's got pretty tight shoulder blades. She's extending her arms in front of her in this body weight squat, just to act as a counterweight. It's going to help her maintain her balance. Okay, let's hit from the side here, over there, from the side. Now I want Leah to go down into a deep squat, because we would have seen and heard a lot of people speak about going all the way down to the ground in their squats, trying to achieve as much depth as possible. As you can see right now, Leah's actually struggling to hit that position because she has a lower back. So maybe it's not such a good idea for her to do, but she doesn't need to worry about that because Leah's a runner, and I don't actually like to program deep squats for my runners too often. If I do it, it's normally for mobility purposes or prehab at the start of the session if I'm trying to work on something very specific for the athlete. But if we look when we run, as we mentioned earlier, we're never in this position when I run. I'm not going to be running from there. So going into a deep squat's not very specific for running. I can actually control the depth a lot more, maybe down to like a half squat than Liz done now, and it's going to load up on my glutes a lot more than if I go all the way down to the bottom, and it's also going to work my hamstrings, and it's going to allow me to really load up that position and develop some power there. So in this position, Leah would be able to lift a lot more weight than if she could go down all the way down, and that way we'd be able to develop proper strength. So if Leah puts the bar on her back, what she's going to do is she's going to go down very slowly, and then she's going to pause at the bottom and then explode up as hard as she can. You can see there, automatically, there's more power going through the movement. And that's what we're trying to get out of the movement. We're trying to load up on the hips, very specific joint angles to running, and develop power there. Okay, next, we're going to do some deadlifts. So Leah's going to get those dumbbells for you over there. For those of you that don't know what a deadlift is, it means picking an object up off the floor, normally from a dead stop. For runners, I like to start teaching it laterally from the sides, so holding dumbbells at the sides, or if we're very lucky, a trap bar. So what Liz is going to do, she's going to stand upright. No, don't go down yet. She's going to activate her core for me. As always, we've got that theme of core activation. We've got her spine nice and tight. She's got a little bit of activation in her shoulder blades over there. What she's going to do, she's going to push her hips back and sit down, sliding those dumbbells down the sides of her legs. You'll notice it's slightly different from the squats, and that her knees don't go quite as far forward, and her hips are slightly higher. Lift her hips a little bit for me over there. And that's the end position. She's then going to squeeze up, pushing her weight through the ground, using her glutes to squeeze up and straighten up her hips over there. That's very nice. A key thing to think about is I'm not trying to stand up. I'm trying to push the world down in this position. Okay? A really, really, really good movement for loading the posterior chain. When we do it this way, it's going to load the legs slightly more, but that's great. I love that in runners. And it's not going to overload the back too much. If we take the bar over here, which is like more classic or traditional deadlift, I'm automatically shifting the weight more to her posterior chain, the back side of her body. Now this is good for some aspects, because as Nick mentioned earlier, we want to get the posterior chain strong. Now you can squeeze up. So you look, Leah's still trying to achieve those same positions as achieving earlier. She's keeping the bar close. You don't need to scrape your shins. A little bit away. We don't want to take all this shit off our skins if we use a bar. But it's going to load up on this posterior chain more. But if you look over here, it's actually placing a lot more stress on her lower back over here. For most people, we don't have very mobile, strong lower backs. And if I start off straight away with this movement over here, it's going to put a lot of pressure on her back. Say she goes for a long run the next day, it might compound. She's going to start feeling a lot of lower back pain. And the next week, she comes to me complaining that she can't run, can't do anything because her lower back's too sore. We like to start with basics, what's more appropriate for a runner, and build it up. Once she's built the appropriate strength and mobility, this is a great movement to load up on those hamstrings, those glutes, and her back and her calves, and it's going to help propel her forward when she runs. Next, we're going to chat about our lunge patterns.
Lunge, not lunch.
Not lunge, lunge. Okay, so we'll look over here. So we already went through the runner's lunge with Nick and myself. So now we're going to progress that slightly into a runner's step up. So what we're looking at is getting a step of about 20 to 30 centimeters high first. The stronger you get, the more you can progress it higher. If you aren't comfortable with this, there's no pressure, you can go even lower. So Leah's going to load up on her glute here. If you look, she's in a similar pattern to that lunge. Her back is nice and straight. She's actually got to lean in her shoulders forward so she can load up on her glutes. And there's a nice shin angle going down there, which she can power through the bench and stand up into a high knee position, just like in the runner's lunge. We're looking at controlling the movement down, especially with the glute and through the quad, and then exploding up into that high knee position. Notice she's fully extending her hips, which is great. That's what we wanted to get out of the movement, and she's nice and strong and stable. Just show me a collapse very quickly. Okay, so there at the top position. There. So that's not what, this is a very common thing that people do. This is what we're not trying to get out of the movement. If you look, it looks like Leah's kind of half sitting down over there. This is something to watch out for. We want that to be nice and straight all the way at the top of the movement. Then we can take this and progress it even further into a lunge step-up combination. So this is a little bit tricky. I can stand aside, so make sure to hold the camera properly. So Leah's going to stand, her feet close together. She's going to step back into a reverse lunge and then step up explosively onto the bench. Excellent, good. Notice the stability already became a lot harder to explode up out of the hip. This is a really, really nice exercise. That's a little for more advanced sort of lifters and runners. really getting that pattern going forward. It's going to work both legs, it's going to work you through the hips, and also under a lot of sort of instability and having to apply a lot of power. Okay, so that's mainly for the lunge pattern. Other honorable mentions that we don't really have enough time to go through today are like the Bulgarian split squat and different variations of that. They're great exercises to use the glutes and really develop some strength out of the hip, which is what I like to do in a lot of my runners. Okay, next we're going to do the push-up before the med balls. I'm actually going to use this again. Okay, we didn't use that. You don't do that.
No, it's
Okay, so Leah is going to demonstrate a push-up. She's going to use the bench over here to scale it to her level. By scale, I mean reduce it to a level that she can do the movement as properly as possible. So if you look over here, we've got about 3 push-ups in her. She's holding a nice, strong core position. She's got a straight line running from her shoulder through to her hips. Okay, you can pause for a second.
And that was the first one.
That was a full one. Leah's now going to demonstrate some pull positions for me. So she had a lovely straight position there. What we don't want when she goes down is for her elbows to fly all the way out to the side. This is probably one of the most common things that I see in a push-up. It's going to load the shoulders and the trap straight away. We're not actually going to load up on our chest muscles. It also feels really uncomfortable, and I personally think it's a bit of injury risk onto our shoulder joint, our acromioclavicular joint there. If you do it, it feels uncomfortable. There's a lot of pressure going through. Another thing that we often see is collapse through the lower back, keeping the bum high on the shoulders, no strength being applied through the shoulders. We want Leah to have a strong core and strong shoulder blades, pushing her weight through the ground with her shoulders, all the way throughout the movements. And that's basically push-ups over there. Good to see here. Okay. And finally, we're going to talk about some medicine ball movements. There's the medicine ball.
These are the fun ones.
These are the fun ones. I love medicine balls. They're really great for developing some full body power. They can be plyometric in nature, such as the ball slams you're about to do, or ball tosses. But they're also really good for rotational core, for throwing our bodies off and us having to stabilize against them and generate some rotational force. So first off, we're going to look at ball slams. Leah's going to stand with her feet either side of the ball. Pause. She's going to go down into a deadlift position. Nice flat back, pushing the bum back, bend knees over there. She's got pretty strong shoulders. She's going to drive through the ground, extend all the way up to the head, and slam down. Lots of power. You want to be as aggressive as possible when you slam down, and you want to use your core and rounding the stomach as you go down, trying to use the core. Disclaimer, don't use this with an elastic medicine ball. It will bounce up and hit you in the face. I know from experience. There's nothing like getting a nosebleed in the middle of the gym. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about a rotational split squat. So if Leah remembers what a split squat is,
I do.
we're going to get into a split stance position. So that's almost like halfway through a lunge, keeping her weight over her front leg. Once again, she's got a pretty active core. If you look, her posture's nice. It's not overarching on the lower back. She's then going to go down, rotating towards her open leg with her shoulders. Notice her shoulders have turned completely. She hasn't just taken her arms across and kept them straight. She's actually rotated there. Now she's going to stand up, rotating to the other side and pushing with the ball. She's allowed to move the ball close to her body on the way up. There we go. It was a lot smoother using that rotational core. A key thought here is to actually think about trying to generate the movement through the torso, imagining there's a sling going across your body. We can also progress this movement into a full lunge, so Leah will take it, lunge backwards, on the way down, turn her shoulders. As she comes up, drive powerfully and up above her head. That looks really nice. Good. And just a couple more times. Okay, so that's a crash course on a few of the movements that I like to do. Obviously, there are just endless amounts of movements and endless ways we can treat them for runners. And that's just a few. Okay, so as Nick mentioned earlier, a big theme for our whole presentation is running longevity. Let's slide across over here. So now you guys can actually see the screen. So the major theme for this workshop is running longevity. And now we're just all going to chat very briefly about what running longevity means to us. So for me personally, running longevity obviously means just the ability for me to actually go out and enjoy a run, to actually get out into the open, into nature, and enjoy myself for as long as possible. I don't want to just be able to run when I'm 50. I want to be able to go out for a run when I'm 60, 70, 80. I really love the outdoors. I love getting out on the trails, and I want to be able to enjoy that for as long as possible. And for me, it's also slightly more than that. I also like to think about the general population, about how difficult it is for so many people, especially as we age, to stay active or just to maintain our health. So often we see people, once you get past 60, 70, moving less and less and less, and then it really severely affects our health and the quality of our life in longer years, in later years. And I just think running is a really good way to make movement enjoyable, to get out into nature and have fun and keep that going for as long as possible. So just for the general population. I'm going to hand it over to Nick next. He's going to take you through what it means for him.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for having watched our workshop today. What is running longevity? I think we've touched on it quite heavily throughout the last 2 hours, and I'm sure you guys have all enjoyed it. For me, I love it. I love running, whether it's for competition, for the social aspect, for fitness, weight loss, whatever it is. For me, running is one of the things that I know I can just put some shoes on, with a bit of extra knowledge, go out, take some time for myself, and just enjoy the outdoors. And that's what running is about. And the ability to do this for the rest of my life is what I want. And if you take a little bit of the information that we got today, I know there's a lot of information, but even if you just walk out of this with a couple of tips that you perform, you are definitely on the right road to having the running longevity. Just to finish off from my side, I want to say thank you for watching. And if you have enjoyed our content, please hit subscribe. There's going to be a lot more interesting and informative content coming through on this page. So I strongly encourage for you guys to actually come on and support us. And yeah, I hope that everyone enjoys their virtual comrades tomorrow. It's going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity for anyone and everyone to get a comrades medal. So I think it's flipping fantastic. And yeah, man, enjoy. Have a good day. I'm going to introduce Leah because she's going to have a special offering for you guys. And also, she's going to be telling us a little bit about her story behind running longevity.
Hey there, guys. 2 hours later, and some of you are still with us. Thank you so much for staying, listening, asking the questions that you have, and just showing up today to hear more about running longevity and how that translates into running in general, no matter which level you are at. So like Nick said, running longevity for each person will mean something different. For me, I agree with Ant's sentiments. I would love to be able to lace up my shoes at age 70 and go for a run because that's my happy space. Running is also very much linked to traveling for us. And this is actually a picture of Nick's Paris Marathon in 2017. So if I can see the world on foot, for me, that is the perfect sentiment of running longevity. So guys, like Nick said, a lot of information has been shared today. And if you are sitting there wondering, oh my gosh, love all the content, but how am I actually going to put this into practice in my own life without watching the YouTube video 50,000 times? Would like that as well. But we also have a package we have put together for you guys for you to continue training with us. And that is called the RunEX Hit the Ground Running Program. Now, usually this program is $500. I'm going to get into a little bit more of what's inclusive in the program. And the simple answer to that is everything we've covered today. We tell you what workouts to do, when to do them, and how to do them for optimal adaptation and performance. We take you through your strength training, and we also have live sessions every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning at 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. where we will actually help you get a grip with these exercises that we have taught you today. And over and above that, like Ant has emphasized, we're runners. What we want to do is run. So we're going to give you the best, most efficient way for you to hit the ground running and continue running and showing up to each and every start line that you put your mind to. So let me get right into our special offering. Like I said, usually the RunEX Hit the Ground Running program goes for $500 a month, where you will receive an updated strength training program as well as an updated running program. But up until the end of June, we are giving you the program for a mere 2,000 Rand for the entire year. This is a 4,000 Rand saving on an annual basis. And if you would like to take advantage of this opportunity, all you need to do is head on over to our imovefitness.co.za website and utilize the promo code RunEX, HTGR, Hit the Ground Running. We will have this up on our social media platforms going forward, so don't worry too much about grabbing a pen right now. All that we would like to do is say thank you again. And we're about to head into a 2-minute interlude where we set up for our Q&A session with the rest of the team to take any of the questions that you may have been sitting on throughout the process of this presentation. Thanks.
This is the worst one.
Hey guys, I'm sorry we're still having technical issues with the camera. It obviously ran out of battery at 2 hours exactly, and we have replaced the battery, but the camera is yet to come on. I do have a question that I'm going to start with, and although you can't see us, you can hear us perfectly. So we are going to continue with the Q&A. If you have questions, please do pop them to us now. This is the time. But I'm going to answer Devin's question. He says regarding core strength training, apart from dedicated core sessions, would you recommend a 5 to 10 minute session after each run? Well, the simple answer, Devin, when it comes to core, the more you do, the better it's going to be. So yes, you can dedicate specific sessions just for the strength training. That is going to help you. But if you would like to, after a run, sit around, do a little bit of rolling and a little bit of mobility work and some core engagement, that's going to go a long way for you. At the end of the day, it's all about what you put in. And the more you put in, the better it will be for you. So I hope that answers the question. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, we actually call that microdosing a strength stimulus. Just instead of doing, like say, 2 really long sessions, actually just adding 5 to 10 minutes and regularly in the week, that can also have a really positive impact. So if you prefer to do it that way, then yeah, that's great.
Cool. Is there anybody else that has any questions for us?
Sorry guys, I know you can't see us, but if you can hear us and you are sitting on a question, please do utilize this time. You will be able to get hold of us via email address, but for the purpose of the session, ask your questions and maybe somebody else is sitting with the same question in mind.
Do you recommend a run after strength training, or rather to just do the strength session on those days? It depends. It depends on the run that you're going to do. I wouldn't recommend doing a run after, like a really hard or high quality sort of running session after a strength session, or on the same day. And that's just simply because your quality is not going to be as high. You are going to be applying yourself, even though, like I mentioned, we have to control that strength session, control the intensities. You will be slightly fatigued. If you're trying to do, say, mile repeats, a really tough session, it's just not going to be as productive as if you didn't do the strength session. We actually normally like to recommend that you do a strength session, only the day before, or like in between easy sessions, not directly before a hard session or the day before a hard session. Try to give sort of at least 24 hours or 48 hours in between difficult sessions. I would consider a strength session as a quality session more than just a recovery session.
Okay, Joss, that should answer your question. It's a lot of information. I hope you guys are still taking this all in. Our next question is from Matthew Skies, and he's asking, how important are arm movements while running? Any tips on correcting movements and specific training?
Well, I'll start with the importance of running movements, and then maybe Anne can give us a little bit about specific drills for it. Just to quickly summarize it, it's obviously very important, guys. Your upper body makes up half your body. And essentially, if your arms are pulling in the wrong direction, you're not going to be getting the most economical running style. So ideally, from my understanding, is you want your arms to be working in unison with what your lower body is doing. And that also obviously means that directing that energy into the direction into which you want to be moving. So to give you an example, if you are running forward and you have your arms swinging from one side to the other side, your legs might be moving forward, but the momentum of your upper body is twisting from left to right. And what that will cause is a loss of energy, and therefore a decrease in your running economy. And from the actual strength training side of things and specific training that you can do for it, there are things.
Yeah. Definitely, I look at actually building just the genuine strength of your upper body. So focusing on doing some pushing and some pulling movements, because as opposed to focusing directly on the arms themselves, because that actually follows the motion a lot more. We're going forwards, we're going backwards with our arms, and it's going to strengthen more muscles, generally improve that strength and endurance of the upper body. And then we like to take it a little bit more specific. As we improve that strength, we start adding in specific drills that work on our arm action, such as sprinter arms. It's actually, I use it in phases in my program.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's quite a community exercise. If you buy the program, you'll actually get a look at some exercises that we put in specifically to actually work on that arm action and the power.
Great answer, guys. But our next question of the year is from Devin Naidu, and Devin is asking, would you also recommend a few minutes on the foam roller after each run session? And what about dedicated foam rolling sessions? If so, how many minutes would you recommend for this?
All right, then. I think the important thing to note is when it comes to foam rolling, there's not an exact science of amount of repetitions and amount of reps and how to specifically perform foam rolling. I think it's extremely important to understand how foam rolling works on a micro level, and that's something that I touched on in terms of the blood flow and how it prevents blood flow to a specific area in order to increase blood flow. And that's what foam rolling is utilized for. It's utilized to improve blood flow to specific areas, and through improving that blood flow, you're improving the mobility and the recovery of that area. And to just go back to your question, would I recommend doing a few minutes of foam rolling after each run session? Most definitely. I mean, if you have the time to do that, I would do that after every single run. It's definitely going to be a nice way to cool down from that run, and also a nice way to just recover long term. You're going to find that your muscle stiffness is not going to be as bad a couple of days after that run, whereas if you had to go for a tough session and not do anything, maybe sit on the couch and watch some TV instead of rolling, you're definitely going to be stiff a couple of days later. Whereas if you roll and do a couple of mobility drills, that's going to be a lot better. And in terms of dedicated foam rolling sessions, again, it's all dependent on the time. So I definitely agree with dedicated foam rolling sessions.
As a recovery session, they're amazing.
As a recovery session, 100%. And in terms of minutes and exact amounts, it varies on what feels right. I mean, you could roll your right glute today and feel absolutely no pain, so you wouldn't spend much time on it. But imagine now tomorrow you've done a hard run, you roll that same right glute and you find various sore spots, you'll spend more time on it. So it's all based on just understanding how your body feels and understanding how it feels after foam rolling, and you just need to target those specific areas adequately. I think that's from my side. I don't know if anyone else here has anything to add to it.
Yeah, no.
I think
if you have the time to do it.
Yeah, there's no contraindications to it from my understanding.
Definitely not going to make you worse.
Yeah,
No.
yeah,
Oh,
for sure.
certainly not. Well,
Okay.
guys, it seems like the questions have come to a bit of a standstill. We'll be here for the next minute or so just to see if there's any last-minute questions that do come through. Just a big thanks to everybody that did join in, the families that came through who are still sitting on their couches watching us now. Thank you so much, Matthew. And yes, great points over there. Tomorrow, guys, we have the virtual Comrades Race the Legends race happening. This, as far as we hope, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to get involved in the legend that is Comrades. Unfortunately, the great race won't be going forward tomorrow as planned, but it's a unique time for us all, and it's a unique opportunity for all of us to actually enter and stand a chance of hanging up a real-life medal on our walls. It's not the Comrades round one you're used to. It's pretty cool looking, but what a great way to generate some pierce around the legend that is Comrades. Next year would actually be the centenary of Comrades. I don't know if any of you know that. So the centenary year of Comrades, that will definitely be going forward, we hope. But unfortunately, this year's won't, and we would just like to honor our race as runners by getting involved. So if you haven't yet entered, you can do so by searching Comrades Race the Legends race. As for the RunEX Comrades special workshop, that is all from our team today. Thank you so much for joining. Meet you at the start line.
Yeah, meet you at the start line.